This night, you journey with Thomas to the Wicked complex in the late aftermath of the scorch. Thomas is held inside Wicked clinical headquarters while the surviving subjects prepare for further examination. The institution offers restored memories and a possible cure for the flare, but the price is another operation, another surrender, and perhaps Thomas's life. The Wicked facility beneath an unnamed city is silent at dawn, 4 weeks after Thomas was placed alone behind a cold metal door. White corridor light rests beneath the threshold, narrow and colorless, while the faint hum of ventilation passes steadily through the walls. Your room contains a bed, a basin, and a small square of dark glass set into the door. The mattress has become familiar beneath your shoulders. The dry hospital smell clings to the blanket, the metal basin, and the air you breathe. Beyond the room, footsteps approach across polished flooring, fade, and return with measured patience. Nothing in the corridor changes, yet each sound seems to carry the promise of movement. The light remains white. The walls remain pale. Somewhere behind them, machinery breathes in a slow, mechanical rhythm, while the cold metal door preserves the last shape of your solitude. When the lock finally withdraws, Thomas steps into the corridor with his hands at his sides, blinking beneath the white light. The door closes behind him without ceremony. A Wicked attendant waits several paces away in a grey coat, wearing a blank expression, and gestures towards the passage ahead. Thomas has been held in solitary confinement for approximately 4 weeks, since the events of the Scorch trials returned him to Wicked control. During that time, he has received food, water, medical examinations, and almost no explanation. Now the assistant director comes to meet him. Jansen is a narrow-faced man, whom the surviving subjects call the Rat Man. He walks quietly across the polished floor, and behind him, several doors open in succession. Beyond them stand Minho, Newt, and the other surviving subjects, gathered beneath the same clinical light. The corridor seems longer than when you first entered it, although every panel remains precisely fitted. White light lies along the ceiling in unbroken strips. It catches the edges of the doors and makes each handle appear colder than the last. The ventilation hum is faint, almost soft, but it never stops. A dry hospital smell moves through the passage, carrying traces of disinfectant and warm dust. Your footsteps join those of the approaching group, each tread returning from the walls with a slight delay. Somewhere nearby, a trolley wheel turns once and settles. The doors remain closed behind you, their metal surfaces holding no reflection, only blurred movement and pale coats beneath the lights. Jansen tells the group that the trials are complete. His voice remains level, as though he is describing a finished medical study rather than the maze, the burning landscapes, and the deaths that followed. Wicked stands for World in Catastrophe, Killzone Experiment Department, an institution created during the spreading ruin of the world. Its scientists designed the maze and the Scorch trials to observe young people under extreme conditions. They measured fear, cooperation, memory, violence, and endurance. They treated living subjects as experimental material while insisting that the suffering served a larger purpose. Jansen, the Rat Man, now presents the result. Most surviving subjects, he says, are immune to the flare. The plague threatens the remaining population, and Wicked claims that the trials have produced information needed for a cure. The room prepared for the meeting is smaller than a classroom and brighter than a chapel. A long table occupies its center, its surface smooth, gray, and cold. You sit beneath a panel of white light that makes the air seem thin. The faint hum of ventilation gathers above you, then disappears into the ceiling. Cold metal doors stand along one wall, each marked with a small number. The dry hospital smell is stronger here, mixed with the sharp scent of instruments kept behind sealed cabinets. Footsteps approach across polished flooring whenever another subject is brought inside. The sound reaches you before the door opens, and for a moment the room feels crowded with people who have not yet arrived. Newt sits near Thomas. Minho rests his hands on the table. Jansen stands at the far end, holding a folder against his chest. The names of the immune and non-immune subjects are read aloud, one by one, in the manner of a hospital register. Thomas listens as each name enters the room and becomes part of Wicked official record. Minho is named among the immune. Thomas is named among the immune. Others receive the same designation, their bodies reduced to categories that may determine their treatment. Then Newt's name is spoken, and the word attached to it is different. Newt is not immune. The sentence is brief, but it alters the balance between the people at the table. Until that moment, the group has shared the possibility that survival might still keep them together. Now the flare has entered the room through a diagnosis. Newt's future has separated from the others, and Jansen's promised cure has acquired the weight of an immediate threat. The chairs make quiet sounds against the floor as the group shifts. A pale strip of light crosses Newt's sleeve and rests there without warmth. His hands remain close together, fingers loose, while the ventilation turns slowly overhead. The table smells faintly of wax and metal. Along the walls, sealed cabinets reflect the room in broken fragments, showing shoulders, faces, and the repeated brightness of the ceiling. You hear a pen moving across paper. Somewhere beyond the room, a door clicks shut. Beneath these sounds, the hospital continues its patient breathing. No one raises a voice, yet Newt's name seems to remain in the air after the reading has ended. Jansen explains that the surviving subjects are being offered the restoration of their erased memories. Before entering the maze, each subject underwent a procedure that removed or concealed much of the past. Wicked says that the lost memories contain valuable evidence about the trials and the subject's behavior. Their restoration is described as a medical necessity, neither punishment nor reward. The procedure will require surgery on the subject's brains. Through that surgery, the scientists claim, hidden portions of memory can be returned, allowing each person to understand the choices already made. Jansen speaks of information, evidence, and the cure. He does not speak of pain for long, nor does he linger over the risks. The offer is placed before Thomas, as though knowledge can be separated from the hand that forces it into existence. The instruments remain out of sight, though their presence can be felt in the careful order of the room. A cabinet door reflects the long white lights, and a narrow silver handle gleams beside Jansen's shoulder. Cool air presses against your face. It carries the dry scent of linen and disinfectant, with something faintly medicinal beneath both. A vent releases a quiet breath, and the edge of a paper trembles once on the table. Beyond the wall, footsteps cross the polished floor in a slow procession. They pass the meeting room, pause, and continue towards another section of the facility. The cold metal doors do not move. Even the shadows beneath the chairs appear measured, arranged by the overhead panels and kept within their boundaries. Thomas does not want to learn who he was before entering the maze. The missing past is frightening, but it is also the last part of himself that Wicked does not visibly control. If the surgeons open his mind, the decision will belong to them, and whatever returns may arrive alongside the authority of those who removed it. Thomas has already seen how Wicked turns memory into a tool. He has watched the organization shape confusion, fear, and hope, then place those feelings inside carefully designed tests. The maze was not an accident. The Scorch trials were not a rescue. Each ordeal was built to expose the subjects to pressure, and every death was absorbed into a collection of results. Thomas remains suspicious because the trials treated people as experimental material, even while Wicked called the work necessary. Your chair is fixed to the floor by two dark bolts. The metal beneath your hands is smooth from repeated cleaning, with the chill of a winter railing. White corridor light enters beneath the closed door and draws a thin line across the room. It touches the legs of the table, then vanishes beneath the nearest chair. The ventilation hum rises and falls without an apparent pattern. A dry hospital smell lies over everything, making the room seem sealed from weather, soil, and living things. In the distance, footsteps approach across polished flooring, then soften as they pass beyond the door. Each sound leaves a small emptiness behind it. You sit within that emptiness while the offered operation waits in Jansen's folder. Minho refuses the memory procedure. His refusal is quiet, direct, and difficult to mistake. Newt refuses as well, though the diagnosis has placed him under a different kind of pressure. Thomas refuses with them. The three do not need a speech to understand the shape of the decision. Wicked can offer a cure, a recovered identity, and an explanation of the past, but every offer is connected to obedience. The surgery would return what was taken only after the subjects surrendered their bodies once more. Thomas, Minho, and Newt decide that refusal is their only remaining freedom. It is not freedom in the broad sense. The doors are guarded. The facility is controlled. The flare continues to spread beyond the walls, yet the answer belongs to them, and for a brief moment, Wicked cannot make them choose it. The room grows still after the refusals. Light gathers on the tabletop like a thin layer of frost. The faint hum of ventilation travels through the ceiling and returns as a vibration beneath the chairs. Newt's breathing is steady, although his face has become pale beneath the white lamps. Minho looks towards the nearest cold metal door, studying the seam where it meets the frame. Thomas keeps his gaze lowered, watching a small mark in the floor between his shoes. A dry hospital smell fills the quiet space. From the corridor comes the measured approach of footsteps, followed by the soft opening of a door. The sound does not belong to anyone in the room, yet everyone hears it. The moment passes without movement, like dust settling in an unused passage. Jansen does not treat the refusals as final. He tells them that the cure depends on what Wicked has learned, and that Wicked knowledge depends on the subjects who survive. The trials, he says, have produced information needed to save the remaining population. The maze measured the mind under confinement. The scorched trials measured the body under exposure, hunger, heat, and uncertainty. Together, the experiments have revealed patterns that may lead to treatment. Jansen presents this conclusion as a chain of reason, each link polished until the suffering disappears behind it. Thomas hears something else beneath the explanation. The cure is offered as proof that obedience was justified. The demand for renewed obedience is hidden inside the language of necessity. Survival in this room appears to require surrender once again. Outside, the facility remains without a visible sky. White corridor light replaces morning, noon, and evening, giving every hour the same pale color. Ventilation breathes through hidden channels, carrying cool air along the walls and beneath the doors. Cold metal waits beneath each person's fingertips. The dry hospital smell has settled into the coats, the table, and the folded papers used by Jansen. Footsteps approach across polished flooring, sometimes heavy, sometimes light, always controlled. A door opens. A voice speaks too softly to understand. Another door closes. The sequence repeats in distant sections of the building. You remain inside the meeting room, surrounded by clean surfaces and careful silence, while the outside world survives somewhere beyond the concrete, touched by the slow spread of the flare. Newt's diagnosis changes the emotional balance of the group more deeply than any announcement about memory. The others have been frightened by Wicked, but fear has remained shared, and shared fear can become a form of companionship. Newt now carries a private certainty that the others cannot take from him. The flare is not only a plague threatening distant populations, it is a future moving through his own body. Thomas sees the weight of this knowledge in the set of Newt's shoulders and the tired patience of his expression. Jansen knows that the diagnosis makes the offer more powerful. A cure is no longer an abstract promise. It stands between Newt and the illness already named within him. Yet Newt still refuses the operation, and that refusal gives the others a different kind of courage. A weak current of air moves across your face from the ceiling vent. It is cold enough to tighten the skin beneath your eyes. White corridor light spills beneath the door, while a smaller panel illuminates the room above the table. Their colors are almost identical, though one seems harder than the other. The metal door carries a faint smell of oil. The floor beneath your shoes is polished so thoroughly that it reflects the lower edges of the chairs. From far away, a machine begins a low cycle and continues for several minutes. Nearer footsteps cross the corridor unhurried. The sounds gather and separate. Nothing arrives, nothing leaves. The room keeps the three refusals inside it, holding them as quietly as the walls hold the ventilation. Thomas understands that the promise of a cure begins with a demand for bodily surrender. Wicked wants the subjects to believe that a procedure is simply another step towards survival. It wants them to see their minds as locked rooms whose keys belong to the organization. Thomas remembers the maze without possessing every detail. He remembers stone, running, alarms, and the faces of people forced into impossible choices. He remembers enough to distrust anyone who calls the experiment a gift. The same institution that erased his memories now offers to return them. The same authority that placed him in danger now claims the right to open his brain. Thomas, Minho, and Newt remain united in their refusal, although the reasons around them are becoming increasingly difficult to bear. The polished floor extends towards the far doors in narrow bands of reflected light. Dust cannot be seen, though a faint warmth rises from somewhere beneath the tiles. The air remains dry. A thin scent of antiseptic lingers at the back of your throat. White light rests upon the walls, leaving no corner completely dark. The ventilation hum is softer now, almost hidden beneath the sounds of breathing. One set of footsteps approaches from the left. Another passes on the other side of the wall. Their separate rhythms create a slow pattern, like distant rain against a window. Cold metal surrounds the room indoors, cabinet handles, and chair frames. You remain still while the facility continues its orderly work around you. The decision does not free Thomas immediately. Wicked still controls the rooms, the records, the medicines, and the corridors connecting one part of the building to another. Jansen still speaks with the authority of a man who expects his instructions to be followed. The surviving subjects still carry injuries from the trials, while Newt carries the knowledge that the flare may claim him. Refusal has changed the terms of the moment, but it has not removed the danger. The opening conflict of this new stage is therefore simple and severe. Survival may require renewed obedience to Wicked. Resistance may preserve the self while shortening the time left to live. Between those possibilities, Thomas chooses uncertainty, because certainty offered by Wicked has always carried a hidden cost. Beyond the meeting room, the corridor lies pale and empty. White light reaches from one sealed door to the next, without shadow or variation. Ventilation moves quietly through the ceiling, touching your hair before fading into stillness. The cold metal doors are smooth beneath your fingertips, each marked only by a number. A dry hospital smell rests over the building like a thin veil. Footsteps approach across polished flooring and slow beside the room. For a few seconds, they remain outside. You hear the soft weight of someone standing there. Then the steps continue, leaving behind only the faint hum of air and the quiet pressure of the closed door. The Death Cure is James Dashner's third, published Maze Runner novel, and its opening follows the Scorch trials into a more enclosed and personal danger. The novel was first published in the United States in October 2011 by Delacourt Press. Its German translation appeared later. The story belongs to a young adult dystopian science fiction series, but the quiet room in which Thomas stands feels older than any category. It resembles a hospital, a prison, and a laboratory joined together. In publication order, the death cure was followed by the prequel, the kill order. For now, the past remains closed, the future remains uncertain, and the white corridors continue beyond the reach of sight. The names remain with you in the pale room. Thomas, Minho, Newt, Jansen the Rat Man, Wicked, the world in catastrophe, Killzone experiment department, the flare. Each name has entered the building and taken its place. The words seem less sharp when held in silence. White light covers the walls. Ventilation murmurs overhead. Cold metal doors wait without expression. A dry hospital smell rests in the folds of your clothing. Somewhere beyond the room, footsteps cross the polished floor and grow distant. Newt lowers his eyes. Minho sits quietly. Thomas stands near the door, breathing slowly, while the offer of restored memory recedes into the background. The facility remains awake around him. The room grows calm. The light stays white. The door is cold. Beyond the door, the corridor has the stillness of a place designed to prevent ordinary time. Pale panels meet beneath your feet. Each seem carefully aligned, while the surgical lamp remains burning in the room behind you. Its brightness spills across the floor, leaving a clean, colorless shape between one wall and the next. The cold air carries the sting of antiseptic, sharp enough to touch the back of your throat. Through a partition, muffled voices move in low currents, rising and fading without forming clear words. A dull pressure gathers behind the eyes, not quite pain, but a patient weight that seems to belong to the building itself. Somewhere nearby, an electronic lock gives a soft click, and the sound disappears into the polished quiet. The offer has been prepared as though it were a kindness. Wicked believes the erased memories contain useful research data, information that may explain the behavior of the maze subjects and the effects of the trials. The procedure is intended to restore experiences from before the maze, returning lost years to the people separated from them. On paper, the arrangement appears almost reasonable. A damaged archive will be opened. Valuable evidence will be recovered. The institution will regain access to material it once gathered. Thomas cannot accept that memory is merely material waiting to be reclaimed. He treats memory as part of personal identity, something carried within a person rather than stored in an institutional cabinet. The distinction settles heavily around him as the offer is described. Wicked frames memory as property that can be recovered for institutional use, while Thomas hears the language of ownership beneath every careful explanation. The past has become a locked chamber, and the people who built the lock now claim the right to enter it. A narrow strip of light lies beneath the corridor door. Dust is absent from the floor, and the smooth surface reflects the lamps in long, pale lines. You stand close enough to feel the chill rising from the metal, while a faint medicinal odor clings to the air. Behind the wall, someone moves a tray, and small instruments touch one another with restrained, silver sounds. The electronic lock answers each movement with a soft click. The ventilation remains steady above you, carrying away warmth before it can settle. Nothing in the facility seems hurried, yet every object suggests preparation. The surgical lamp continues burning, patient and exact, over the place where memory is meant to be opened. Thomas remembers fragments of a life in which he helped Wicked. The memories do not arrive as a complete story, but as brief images with sharp edges. He sees diagrams of corridors, lines drawn across maps, and measurements written beside doors. He remembers the maze not only as a prisoner, but as someone who helped create it before his own memory was removed. The knowledge is difficult because it joins two identities he has tried to keep apart. The boy who suffered inside the maze and the earlier person who helped design it are both Thomas. His past association with Wicked makes memory restoration especially troubling. The procedure may reveal what happened, but it may also return the reasoning that once allowed him to participate. Thomas fears that his former self may have accepted Wicked methods, believing that pain could be justified by a distant result. Such a fear reaches deeper than the fear of surgery. It suggests that forgetting may have concealed not only facts, but moral responsibility. The prospect of recovered memory becomes another form of confinement, because the restored past may close around him as firmly as any room. The corridor bends gently towards a treatment wing, where the walls become warmer in color but no less bare. Under your hands, the railing feels smooth and faintly damp from repeated cleaning. Antiseptic sharpens near the doorway, and the dull pressure behind your eyes settles into a slow, even pulse. A surgical lamp burns beyond a glass panel, its circular face bright against the dim interior. Voices pass through the wall as muffled shapes, too blurred to identify. When the treatment door opens, the electronic lock produces its quiet click, and the sound seems almost tender in the surrounding silence. The subjects are divided into Group A and Group B, categories established by Wicked long before the survivors understand what they mean. Thomas belongs to Group A, a designation that has followed him through rooms, records, and experiments. The division is presented as scientific order, a way to compare responses under controlled conditions. Yet the categories also separate people who have suffered together, placing their identities inside a system built by others. Group A and Group B become more than labels in a file. They become reminders that every friendship has been observed, measured, and interpreted. Teresa and Aris retain more of their earlier connection to Wicked than Thomas does. Their memories hold different traces of the organization, and those traces disturb the fragile trust among the survivors. Teresa can remember more of the past that Thomas has lost. Aris carries knowledge linking him to the same machinery. Thomas, by contrast, stands between recognition and absence, aware that his missing history may contain the very things he most wants to understand. The unequal shape of remembering creates distance, even when no one intends to cause it. Warm air gathers briefly near a vent, then fades as the system draws it away. The corridor smells of disinfectant and cold metal, with a faint trace of fabric from the clean garments stored behind the walls. The lamps make no shadows strong enough to hide in. Every surface appears softened by white light, while the corners remain gently indistinct. You hear a low murmur behind the partition, followed by the careful movement of wheels. The surgical lamp continues to glow in the distance, and its reflection trembles on the floor whenever someone passes. Behind you, another lock closes with a soft electronic click. Minho is one of Thomas's closest surviving companions from the glade. He carries the memory of that place differently, with a hardness shaped by danger and loss. Newt is also a former glader and a central member of Thomas's group, a steady presence whose quietness often says more than formal arguments. When the operation is discussed, Minho and Newt need no long explanations to understand what is being asked. They recognize that Wicked is offering knowledge through a method that may change the person who receives it. Only Thomas, Minho, and Newt refuse the operation among the principal group of survivors. Their refusal is not loud, and it does not carry the satisfaction of victory. It is spoken within a room where the institution controls the doors, lights, and schedule. Those who accept the procedure are separated from Thomas's immediate circle, taken towards different rooms and arrangements. Separation becomes another instrument of Wicked design. Each person is made to face the past alone, while the surviving friendships grow quieter under the pressure of uncertainty. The room prepared for the operation holds a narrow bed beneath the surgical lamp. Its white covering has been folded with exactness, without a wrinkle or loose thread. Your fingertips rest against the wall, where the paint feels cool and slightly grainy. Antiseptic stings the air, and your eyes feel the familiar dull pressure from the bright ceiling panels. Voices remain muffled beyond the partition, accompanied by distant footsteps and the occasional roll of a trolley. A small monitor emits a muted tone, then falls silent. The electronic lock clicks, as the door settles into place, and the room seems to draw a little farther from the world. Thomas does not know whether refusing the operation protects him or leaves him incomplete. Without the procedure, the past remains divided into fragments, impressions that appear at unexpected moments and vanish before they can be examined. With the procedure, Wicked may recover its research data, but Thomas may lose control of what returns. The trade-off also involves the loss of telepathic communication. If the operation is completed, Thomas would lose his ability to communicate mentally with Teresa and Aris. The connection that has helped him survive would be removed as part of the bargain. That possibility makes the offer feel more intimate than a medical decision. The telepathic bond is not simply a useful instrument because it has carried fear, warning, affection, and fragments of shared understanding. Wicked presents its loss as one condition among several, as if human closeness could be entered into a calculation beside blood pressure and memory response. Thomas hears the quiet violence inside that arrangement. The institution asks him to surrender a living connection in exchange for access to a deadened past, and neither side of the bargain promises peace. A thin brightness rests along the edge of the bed, and the air above it seems almost motionless. The antiseptic smell has settled into the fabric, becoming part of the room rather than something brought from outside. You hear voices through the wall, their syllables softened until they resemble distant conversation beneath water. The lamp overhead gives off no warmth, though its glow reaches every corner. A dull pressure remains behind your eyes as the monitor's small light rises and dims. Near the entrance, the lock makes a soft click, and the sound travels across the room like a small metal footstep. Thomas remembers another kind of room, one in which plans for the maze were discussed by people who believed they were protecting the future. The memory is incomplete, yet its emotional shape is clear. He remembers concentration, urgency, and the conviction that suffering could be placed within a larger design. He may have believed that the trials were necessary. He may have helped decide how the walls shifted, how the doors opened, and how the gladers would be tested. The details do not remain long enough to form a complete confession, but they leave behind a troubling impression of agreement. His fear is not only that Wicked used him, it is that he once accepted Wicked methods. If the earlier Thomas believed the ends could justify the means, recovered memory might return a version of himself he cannot forgive. Forgetting may have made him better, or merely incomplete. The uncertainty follows him through every corridor, moving beside the knowledge that his present character has been shaped by absence. Thomas cannot prove that the person before the maze was cruel, but neither can he prove that he was innocent. Outside the treatment wing, rain touches the high windows in fine, irregular patterns. The glass turns the outside world into a pale blur of roofs, cables, and distant towers. Cold water gathers along the lower frames, while the interior air remains dry and carefully filtered. A faint smell of wet stone reaches the corridor, mixed with the sharper sting of antiseptic. The voices behind the wall become quieter as the rain grows steadier. Under the surgical lamp, metal surfaces hold small reflections like thin pieces of ice. The electronic lock clicks once, and the storm continues without entering. Minho's refusal begins as a simple statement, then becomes a fixed position. He does not trust Wicked to restore anything without taking something else in return. Newt stands with him, his expression tired but composed, carrying the quiet knowledge of someone who has already lost too much to another person's experiment. Together with Thomas, they form a small resistance inside the larger group. Their decision cannot change the structure around them, yet it gives shape to the remaining freedom. They will not allow Wicked to decide which parts of them may be recovered. The others who accept the procedure are separated from Thomas's immediate circle before the operation begins. Their departure leaves open spaces in the rooms, empty chairs, and untouched cups that make the absence feel physical. Teresa and Aris move through the same system with more knowledge of its earlier workings, while Thomas remains uncertain about what his own connection may reveal. The division between Group and Group B seems to widen in the silence. People who once shared the glade now occupy different paths through Wicked facility, each shaped by a separate bargain. A corridor light flickers once above the polished floor, then steadies into its ordinary white glow. You stand beside a closed door and feel the chill of its handle through your fingers. The surface carries the faint texture of repeated use, though no mark identifies the hands that have touched it. Somewhere within the walls, wheels move slowly over a threshold. The rain has become a muted rustle beyond the glass, and the ventilation answers with a deeper murmur overhead. Antiseptic remains strongest near the operating room, while the air beside the window carries damp stone. The lock gives its soft click again. Before Wicked can complete the surgery, the possibility of escape enters the room through Brenda. She appears as both rescuer and possible agent, a person whose intentions cannot easily be separated from her connection to the organization. Brenda helps Thomas escape before the procedure is completed, but her assistance does not immediately settle the question of trust. Jorge also assists, bringing experience and practical knowledge to the movement through the facility. Both Brenda and Jorge have links to Wicked, making their help difficult to interpret. Thomas initially experiences Brenda's connection to Wicked as a betrayal. Her presence carries warmth and urgency, yet the knowledge of her association places a shadow over every gesture. He cannot tell whether she is acting from loyalty, compassion, or instructions given by someone beyond the room. The uncertainty becomes especially painful because Brenda is helping him when the institution has made the rest of the world feel closed. A rescuer may still belong to the machinery that created the danger, and Thomas cannot dismiss that possibility simply because he needs her help. The escape route narrows between service walls where the air is warmer and heavier. Pipes run overhead, ticking softly as the building changes temperature. You brush past a painted surface that feels rough beneath your sleeve, while dust gathers in corners that the main corridors never reveal. The sting of antiseptic weakens, replaced by damp concrete and the faint mineral scent of old water. Behind you, muffled voices rise beyond a wall and fade as a door closes. The surgical lamp remains burning somewhere behind the sealed rooms. Farther ahead, an electronic lock answers with a soft click. Brenda and Jorge move Thomas through spaces Wicked has not prepared for public passage. Their assistance is practical rather than reassuring. A door opens before anyone reaches it. A warning arrives before footsteps turn the corner, and a locked passage becomes briefly available. Each act of help carries a question inside it. Thomas knows that Brenda has links to Wicked, and he knows that Jorge's history is also connected with the organization. Their knowledge allows the escape to continue, while their affiliations prevent Thomas from feeling entirely safe. The procedure remains unfinished when Thomas leaves the treatment area. That incompleteness matters because the operation has already changed the shape of his future, even without reaching its intended conclusion. Wicked has not recovered every useful memory, and Thomas has not lost the telepathic communication connecting him to Teresa and Aris. The trade-off remains suspended rather than resolved. He carries the possibility of restored experience without receiving restoration, and the possibility of loss without yet suffering it. The corridor behind him becomes another sealed part of the past. Outside the service passage, the air carries the coolness of night. Rain has darkened the ground, and water trembles in shallow hollows beside the building. You feel the wet surface of the wall beneath your palm, gritty with dust that the facility's cleaners never reach. A distant generator hums behind the compound, blending with the softened patter from the roof. The antiseptic scent has almost disappeared, though it remains faintly present in your clothing. Somewhere inside, A lamp still burns over the empty treatment room. The final lock closes with a gentle electronic click. Thomas escapes with Brenda and Jorge, but the memory question follows him beyond the facility. He does not know whether the fragments in his mind will become clearer with time or dissolve into new confusion. He cannot determine whether his former self was a willing participant, a frightened child, or someone who believed deeply in a purpose that later became monstrous. His association with Wicked remains both personal history and moral uncertainty. The maze was built before he entered it, yet some part of him may have helped decide its design. Teresa and Aris remain connected to memories Thomas cannot fully reach. Their earlier links to Wicked give them knowledge that may help explain the past, but they also make every recovered detail carry the possibility of another wound. Thomas still has the telepathic communication binding them, though he knows the procedure could have taken it away. The loss has been avoided, not erased from consideration. In quiet moments, the thought of that bargain returns, joined to the question of whether any truth is worth surrendering the people who can share it. The night outside is softer than the facility, though distant machinery continues beneath the rain. Wet leaves collect against a low wall, and their surfaces shine whenever light passes across them. You breathe air that has not been filtered through vents, carrying soil, water, and the faint smoke of a far-off engine. The cold touches your face without the sharpness of metal. Behind the compound, one high window remains illuminated, a small square suspended in the darkness. The surgical lamp is no longer visible, yet its brightness seems to remain in the memory of your eyes. Minho and Newt have refused the operation alongside Thomas, and their refusal becomes a quiet promise carried into the uncertain road ahead. They are former Gladers, survivors of a place designed to make companionship difficult, and their loyalty now exists outside Wicked categories. Thomas belongs to Group A, but the label cannot fully describe the person walking beyond the facility. Group A and Group B may still govern records and experiments, yet they cannot entirely govern the bonds formed in the glade. Names and numbers remain behind, while the survivors carry one another forward. Newt walks with the careful rhythm of someone conserving strength. Minho keeps his attention upon the dark spaces beyond the road, alert even when no immediate danger appears. Brenda remains near Thomas, and Jorge guides them through the wet outskirts with the confidence of someone familiar with hidden routes. Their presence offers safety and uncertainty at the same time. Brenda's connection to Wicked still feels like a betrayal to Thomas, although her actions have helped preserve his freedom. Trust has not returned, but the possibility of trust has not disappeared. Rainwater slips from the edges of broken concrete and gathers in narrow channels. The ground gives slightly beneath your shoes, holding the impressions for a few moments before water smooths them away. A breeze moves through the dark grass, carrying the cool smell of mud and leaves. From the compound, a muted alarm sounds once and is swallowed by the weather. The last visible window dims behind a veil of rain. You hear no voices now, only the low engine in the distance and the quiet movement of people traveling without a map. Wicked believes the erased memories contain research data that can still be useful. That belief has not changed because Thomas escaped, and the institution may continue to seek the lost experiences of Group A and Group B. The memory procedure remains a promise, a threat, and a form of ownership spoken in the language of science. Wicked intends to restore experiences from before the maze, yet the recovered past may belong to the survivors in ways no institution can measure. The question is not simply what happened before the maze. It is who has the right to decide what those memories mean. Thomas carries fragments of the old work within him. He remembers the maze as a creation, not only as a prison, and the knowledge makes his freedom feel morally unfinished. He cannot return to the person he was before the memory removal, because that person has been changed by absence. He cannot become entirely separate from Wicked, because the organization has shaped his history and his fears. Between remembering and forgetting, Thomas remains uncertain whether he has escaped the facility or merely moved its walls inside himself. At the edge of the road, a weak lamp hangs from a rusted bracket and shines through the rain. Its light touches the puddles in broken pieces, leaving dark spaces between each reflection. You feel the damp fabric at your shoulders and the steady coolness along your hands. The air no longer carries much antiseptic, though the sting remains somewhere at the back of your throat. Behind you, the compound has become a low outline beneath the clouds. The building's ventilation murmurs faintly across the distance, like breath heard through a closed wall. The memory question remains unresolved after Thomas's escape. No complete explanation arrives to replace the fragments, and no final judgment settles the meaning of his earlier connection to Wicked. He may once have accepted the organization's methods, or he may have been carried along by forces he did not understand. The evidence is scattered through sensations, images, and silences. Thomas treats memory as identity, while Wicked treats it as property and research. Between those positions, the past remains inaccessible enough to trouble him and present enough to shape every decision. The road descends towards a darker stretch of land where the rain falls more lightly. Water drips from branches overhead, striking leaves with separate, measured sounds. Your breathing becomes easier in the open air, although the dull pressure behind your eyes has not fully gone. Jorge's footsteps press into the wet ground ahead, and Brenda's sleeve brushes yours when the path narrows. Minho and Newt keep to either side, their movements familiar from another life. Far behind, the facility holds its white rooms, cold doors, and surgical lamp burning for no one. Thomas has escaped before Wicked can complete the operation, but escape does not restore what was lost. The telepathic communication with Teresa and Aris remains available, though the memory of nearly losing it stays close. Minho and Newt remain beside him, carrying the weight of their refusal. Brenda and Jorge have helped him pass beyond the locked rooms, even while their links to Wicked complicate the meaning of their assistance. The past has not been recovered, and the future has not become simple. Night settles across the road in layers of grey and blue. Rain softens the trees until their branches resemble charcoal marks against the sky. The earth releases a quiet, damp fragrance beneath your feet, and cool air moves steadily across your face. In the far distance, a vehicle passes, its sound fading before its lights appear. The facility is hidden now, though the memory of its walls remains precise. Somewhere within it, voices may still move through partitions, and an electronic lock may still answer with its soft click. Thomas continues with uncertainty, neither restored nor entirely empty. Forgetting may have made him better, preserving the person he became after the maze, or it may have left him incomplete, separated from the choices that formed him. The answer remains beyond reach, guarded by Wicked records and the damaged architecture of his own mind. His former self is present in fragments, and the fragments are enough to prevent peace, but not enough to provide certainty. The memory Wicked wants back remains partly Thomas's, partly the institution's, and partly lost. The rain thins until only occasional drops fall from the leaves. A pale break appears between the clouds, allowing a little moonlight to rest upon the road. Your clothing feels heavy with dampness, and the air smells of wet soil, moss, and distant smoke. No white lamps shine here, and no cold metal door stands before you. The quiet is not empty, because footsteps, breathing, and dripping water continue in gentle layers. Behind the group, the final sound of the facility has vanished. Ahead, the darkness opens without offering an explanation. Thomas walks beside the people who refuse to surrender their memories to Wicked purpose. Minho remains one of his closest surviving companions from the glade, and Newt remains a central member of the group, steady within the uncertainty. Teresa and Aris remain connected through the telepathic bond that the operation might have removed. Brenda remains both rescuer and possible agent, while Jorge remains a guide whose history reaches back towards the organization. The past has followed them into the night, but it has not yet chosen a final form. The road grows quieter beneath the softened sky. Moisture shines on the grass, and the branches release their last drops one by one. You feel the cold gradually leave your face as the wind settles behind the trees. The facility has become only a distant darkness, and the sharp smell of antiseptic has faded from the open air. Behind your eyes, the dull pressure loosens, though it does not disappear entirely. A final electronic click may still exist somewhere beyond hearing, closing a door that cannot close the question of memory. The last electronic click remains somewhere behind your thoughts, while the corridor beyond the trees becomes a sealed laboratory once more. You stand beneath white lights, surrounded by doors, glass, and the slow mechanical breathing of hidden machines. The air has lost the softness of evening, becoming dry against your lips and faintly warm upon your skin. Beneath the floor, low machinery turns with restrained persistence, carrying power through the walls and beneath your feet. A smell of warmed plastic rests over the sharper scent of antiseptic, as though the building itself has been gently heated. Somewhere nearby, a monitor gives a pulse-like tone, each note arriving with the calm regularity of a distant clock. Jansen sits opposite you behind a narrow table, his hands placed carefully beside a folder of medical papers. The quiet rustle of those pages follows every movement, while his pale eyes remain fixed upon your face. He speaks of Wicked's stated purpose, with the patience of a man repeating a conclusion already accepted by everyone around him. The flare, he says, is advancing through the remaining populations, damaging minds and bodies with gradual, pitiless efficiency. The infected are commonly called cranks, although the ordinary name does little to describe the fear inside their homes. Wicked has studied the disease for years and claims that its purpose has always been to find a cure. Every experiment, Jansen insists, has been directed towards that final promise. Across the room, sealed vents release a thin breath of filtered air, too dry to carry any natural scent. It passes over your forehead and settles against the back of your neck. The walls shine with a faint grey reflection, and the floor holds the dull polish of a place cleaned many times each day. Under the table, a cable vibrates softly whenever the machinery beneath the building changes its rhythm. A small indicator light blinks beside the monitor, keeping time with the pulse-like tone. Medical paper shifts beneath Jansen's fingers, making a delicate whisper that seems louder than the distant engines. Nothing in the room moves quickly, yet every object appears prepared for a decision. The institution believes that the brains of immune subjects may reveal the pattern of resistance hidden within the flare. Your mind, therefore, is not merely valuable to Wicked. It is treated as an instrument. Jansen presents you as especially important to the final stage of the research, because your responses have remained unusual through the maze and the scorch. The maze exposed children to controlled danger and constant observation, measuring how fear altered memory, loyalty, and choice. The scorch placed subjects within a ruined and infected environment, where hunger, heat, violence, and sickness formed another kind of laboratory. The trials were designed to provoke stress and measure responses, while researchers recorded every fracture and recovery. Your chair gives a small complaint when you shift your weight, and the sound disappears beneath the building's low mechanical hum. The metal beneath your palms feels neither cold nor warm, but perfectly neutral, as though it has been made to avoid comfort. A thin film of condensation has gathered inside a glass panel near the ceiling, though the laboratory air remains dry. The warmed plastic smell rises from the equipment whenever a hidden fan begins to work. Beyond the partition, Someone folds a sheet of medical paper, and the quiet rustle travels through the sealed room. The monitor continues its measured tone, patient and impersonal, offering no sign that the body beside it belongs to anyone. Jansen explains that the final procedure would expose the structures of your brain in ways ordinary examination cannot achieve. Wicked believes the operation may identify the pattern that allows immune subjects to resist the flare's progress. He does not describe the procedure as safe, because the operation is dangerous and may destroy or kill the subject. The medical promise gradually becomes an implied death sentence, spoken through careful phrases about necessity, probability, and the future. The title "The Death Cure" carries that terrible price within it, joining the hope of treatment to the possibility of a life deliberately spent. A cure may be promised, yet the subject selected to reveal it may never survive its discovery. The sealed laboratory seems to narrow around the table, although its walls remain exactly where they were. Dry air scrapes lightly across your throat, and the plastic scent gathers along the edges of each breath. The machinery underfoot produces a low vibration that enters your shoes before reaching your ears. A monitor tone rises, pauses, and falls again, its pulse-like pattern remaining unchanged. Medical paper lies in overlapping layers, soft at the corners from repeated handling. A strip of light shines across the polished floor, revealing faint scratches beneath its surface. Those marks have no history that you can read, yet they suggest that other decisions have already passed through this room. Wicked argues that extreme conditions are justified by the scale of the catastrophe beyond its walls. Millions of strangers may be suffering, and every delay may allow the flare to consume another mind. The institution treats its subjects as a possible resource for those distant millions, reducing individual lives to evidence, patterns, and outcomes. The maze and the scorch become necessary steps within that reasoning, while pain is described as information and terror becomes useful data. Jansen speaks of numbers because numbers are easier to carry than faces, names, and frightened voices. You hear the logic clearly, but clarity does not make it merciful. A narrow tray passes through a slot in the wall, carrying instruments beneath a sheet of sterile material. It leaves behind the dry scent of disinfectant and the faint warmth of recently used plastic. Its wheels make almost no sound against the floor, though one turns with slight irregularity. Beneath the surface, low machinery continues its unseen work, supporting lights, doors, cameras, and monitors. The pulse-like tone remains close to your right shoulder, marking time without revealing the hour. Somewhere in the ventilation system, a metal panel settles with a quiet click. Medical paper brushes against itself as the tray disappears, producing a sound as small as falling ash. You think of the people outside wicked walls, though still dying in districts where the flare has altered ordinary life. You imagine rooms with covered windows, streets emptied by quarantine, and families listening for changes in a loved one's breathing. The thought does not make the operation acceptable, but it makes the question heavier than simple refusal. Somewhere beyond the sealed doors, infected people are losing language, judgment, memory, and control. Their bodies weaken as the disease advances, while those around them learn to fear the person they once knew. Newt's illness makes the abstract cure painfully immediate, because the flare is no longer an enemy described on paper. The laboratory offers no window through which you might locate morning or evening. White light falls evenly over the walls, giving every surface the same exhausted color. A dry current moves from the ceiling vent towards the floor, stirring a loose corner of medical paper. The warmed plastic smell has become familiar, almost domestic, though nothing in the room belongs to a home. Low machinery rolls beneath the tiles like distant water trapped inside stone. The monitor tone sounds again, gentle enough to be mistaken for reassurance. Your hand rests near the table's edge, where the laminate has been worn smooth by countless unseen fingers. Newt's lack of immunity leaves him vulnerable to the flare's progress, and no argument can turn that fact into an abstraction. The disease has already begun its work inside him, gradually damaging his mind and body while preserving enough awareness for suffering. You remember the terrible distance between the friend you knew and the person fear may force him to become. A cure that could save Newt would mean more than a scientific result, yet his condition also reveals the danger of trusting wicked promise. The institution may offer treatment, but it has repeatedly used that promise to secure cooperation. Hope becomes another instrument placed beside the restraints. A sheet of medical paper slides beneath the folder, and its edge catches briefly against the tabletop. The tiny interruption changes the rhythm of the room before the monitor resumes its pulse-like tone. You smell warmed plastic near the lamps, mingled with the faint mineral odor of filtered water. Dry air presses against your hands, drawing moisture from the skin around your knuckles. The low machinery beneath the floor remains constant, but a heavier vibration passes through the chair. Light gathers on the metal instruments and fades whenever someone moves beyond the glass. Nothing outside the laboratory enters directly, yet the whole building seems to be listening. You and the others weigh a possible cure against the certainty of another violation, and neither side of that balance remains clean. Saving strangers matters, but wicked method places one person beneath a blade without certainty of success. Thomas rejects the idea that a cure automatically excuses every experiment, because a noble purpose cannot erase deliberate harm. His resistance is therefore both personal and ethical, rooted in memory as much as in principle. He knows what the maze required, what the scorch endured, and what the trials measured from frightened children. The question becomes whether one person may be sacrificed for an uncertain collective benefit. The room grows warmer near the equipment, while the corners remain cool and untouched by the hidden vents. A pale reflection trembles across the glass whenever machinery below changes its load. The smell of warmed plastic settles into the dry air, reminding you of sealed containers left beneath artificial light. Medical paper lifts and falls with each passing current, making a quiet rustle like grass under a weak wind. The monitor's pulse-like tone continues without haste, neither rising towards alarm nor softening into silence. Your breathing seems louder beside it, although no instrument records the difference. The floor holds you firmly, and that firmness feels less like safety than preparation. Jansen insists that Wicked has no alternative equal to the scale of the flare. He describes abandoned hospitals, crowded shelters, and regions where the infected are separated from everyone they love. The institution's argument depends upon a future in which millions might live because one subject submitted to the final procedure. Yet the proposed operation may destroy or kill the very person whose brain contains the hoped-for pattern. No completed universal cure is ever placed into the survivor's hands, and the promise remains suspended between theory and sacrifice. Wicked asks for trust at the precise moment when its record gives you the strongest reason to refuse. A clear tube beside the table contains a colorless fluid, perfectly still beneath the laboratory lights. The surface reflects the ceiling in a narrow, trembling line, disturbed only when machinery sends a faint vibration through the cabinet. Dry air gathers in your nose and leaves the room smelling of plastic, metal, and distant antiseptic. A pulse-like monitor tone repeats near the wall, its softness made more unsettling by the absence of human speech. The quiet rustle of medical paper rises whenever Jansen turns a page. Beneath everything lies the restrained movement of pumps, fans, and motors, patiently maintaining a world without weather. Thomas considers the possibility that refusing may leave countless people without even the chance of treatment. The thought troubles him because resistance cannot be made harmless by calling it resistance. Newt's illness stands at the center of that conflict, giving a face to every infected person who has become frightened, confused, or violent. Around him, the cranks represent both victims and warnings, people whose minds are gradually damaged until their bodies no longer seem entirely their own. A cure might restore them, or it might remain another story designed to move the healthy towards cooperation. The uncertainty does not lessen the suffering, but it changes what can honestly be demanded. The ceiling lights produce a faint electrical murmur that settles above the louder sounds beneath the floor. Warmed plastic carries a dry sweetness, while disinfectant leaves a colder trace along the back of your throat. A folded sheet of medical paper rests beside the instruments, its crease catching a narrow line of light. The monitor's pulse-like note enters the silence at regular intervals, sounding almost like a careful footstep. Air moves through the sealed laboratory without any trace of rain, soil, leaves, or open distance. Your sleeve touches the chair, and the fabric makes a small whisper against the hard surface. Jansen presents Thomas's brain as the final key, yet the language of keys and doors conceals the person being used. He speaks of neural pathways, immune responses, and patterns that may exist only in tissue beneath memory. The importance assigned to Thomas grows until it resembles ownership, as though valuable information grants wicked authority over his life. Thomas understands that the researchers may have discovered something real, but real knowledge does not grant them an unlimited right to obtain it. A person is not transformed into equipment merely because millions of others are in danger. The cure's promise, therefore, becomes inseparable from the question of consent. The corridor beyond the glass remains empty, illuminated by lights that never vary with the passing hours. A door closes somewhere farther away, and the sound arrives softened through layers of insulation. Low machinery continues under the floor, maintaining the laboratory's dry and regulated atmosphere. The warmed plastic smell grows faint whenever ventilation turns over, then returns in a thin artificial wave. Medical paper shifts in the wake of that current, its fibers brushing together with quiet restraint. The monitor answers with its pulse-like tone, placing one measured note after another inside the sealed air. There is no natural sound to interrupt the pattern. The group understands that Wicked has always converted uncertainty into permission. The maze was called necessary because controlled danger could expose hidden responses, while the Scorch was defended as a model of the ruined world. The trials were framed as measurements, although the children inside them experienced fear as something immediate and bodily. Each stage produced observations, but observation never became an apology for the harm inflicted. The institution argues that extreme conditions are justified by catastrophe, yet catastrophe does not remove the moral weight of each choice. Thomas cannot accept a system that calls itself necessary whenever it wants obedience. A faint warmth radiates from the instrument cabinet, making the air near your knees slightly less severe. The sealed room remains dry enough for your lips to feel tight, and every breath seems to pass over polished surfaces. Plastic, metal, and antiseptic create a scent without any trace of the living world. The quiet rustle of medical paper continues beside the folder, delicate against the heavy machinery below. The pulse-like monitor tone rises from a small speaker and fades before the next sound arrives. Beneath your chair, the floor vibrates so gently that the movement might belong to your own body. Thomas remembers that the subjects were children when the maze began, even if Wicked preferred the language of research. They were exposed to controlled danger, watched through hidden systems, and evaluated according to reactions they had never agreed to provide. The Scorch extended the experiment into ruined streets and infected territories, where survival itself became another measurement. The institution collected stress responses while insisting that the scale of the disaster excused its design. Now the same reasoning is directed towards the final operation, where the cost may no longer be fear, injury, or memory, but alive. Thomas decides that Wicked cannot be trusted with the final choice. The decision does not arrive like a sudden movement, because the laboratory allows no gesture large enough to match its meaning. It forms slowly beneath the monitor's pulse-like tone, the dry air, and the restless machinery. Medical paper continues to whisper at the table, indifferent to whether the procedure is accepted or refused. The warmed plastic smell rests against your clothes, while sealed vents preserve a temperature chosen by someone else. Every surface remains clean, bright, and prepared. In that careful order, you sense the quiet danger of a place where terrible acts can be performed without visible disorder. Jansen does not accept the decision as an ethical conclusion, and he returns instead to the suffering beyond wicked walls. He speaks of families who have no medicine, communities that have lost their doctors, and children born into quarantine. His words carry the weight of genuine knowledge, which makes them more difficult to dismiss. Thomas knows that people are dying, and he knows that a cure might save them. Yet the same institution asking for sacrifice has never offered proof that the operation will succeed. The proposed benefit remains uncertain, while the violation of Thomas's body is immediate, deliberate, and almost certainly irreversible. Somewhere above the ceiling, a ventilation fan changes speed and sends a thin current across the room. The dry air touches your face with the same neutrality as the metal beneath your hands. A plastic casing gives off a faint, warmed odor, softened by the filtered atmosphere. The monitor keeps its pulse-like rhythm, allowing no silence long enough for the room to feel empty. Medical paper slides a fraction across the table, moved by air too slight to be seen. Low machinery persists beneath the floor, turning darkness into power and power into continued observation. Newt's name remains inside the room even when nobody speaks it. His lack of immunity makes him vulnerable to the flare's progress, and that vulnerability refuses to remain theoretical. The illness moves through infected people gradually, damaging thought, memory, balance, and the body's ability to endure itself. Cranks are not monsters created from nowhere, but people altered by a disease Wicked claims to understand. A treatment capable of reaching them would matter profoundly, yet the institution's promise has become tangled with the demand for another surrender. Thomas must decide what he owes to Newt, to strangers, and to the person whose life is being requested. The lights cast a faint silver line along the table's edge, while the surrounding walls keep their dull, sealed color. Dry air moves through the vents and carries the smell of warmed plastic towards the corridor. A monitor tone sounds behind your shoulder, measured like a pulse beneath skin. Under the floor, low machinery turns with a depth that makes the chair tremble slightly. The quiet rustle of medical paper accompanies each distant footstep beyond the glass. There is no rain here, no soil, and no changing sky, only artificial conditions arranged for a body under examination. Thomas understands that personal pain and ethical judgment cannot be separated cleanly. He resists because the procedure threatens him, and because the same logic could place any vulnerable person beneath the instruments. The subjects have been treated as a possible resource for millions of strangers, valuable only while their suffering produces useful information. Wicked Promise asks the individual to disappear inside a calculation that will never show his face. Thomas cannot make the calculation honest by pretending that one life has no value. The uncertain collective benefit does not become certain merely because the cost is immediate. A technician places another folder on the table, and the cover lands with a soft, flat sound. Its pages carry the dry odor of paper kept too long beneath fluorescent lamps. Plastic warms around the monitors, releasing a faint scent that clings to the sealed air. The machinery below continues its low passage through the building, steady as a buried current. A pulse-like tone marks the spaces between voices, while the vents maintain their careful breath. Your fingers rest beside a printed diagram, and the ink appears darker where the overhead light strikes it. Jansen tells Thomas that hesitation may condemn people who have never heard his name. The argument is powerful because it contains a truth, and the truth is painful enough without being enlarged into coercion. Thomas does not deny the suffering outside, nor does he deny that wicked research may contain genuine discoveries. He rejects the belief that a cure automatically excuses every experiment carried out in its name. No future treatment can erase the maze, the scorch, or the trials from the bodies and memories of those who survived them. The promise of rescue cannot be used forever to postpone responsibility. The laboratory seems to hold its breath when the conversation ends, though the machines continue beneath the floor. Warmed plastic and antiseptic settle into the dry air, creating an atmosphere without season or distance. The monitor tone repeats its small pulse beside the glass, never changing its measured character. A loose page moves once, then lies still, its corner aligned with the folder's edge. Beyond the wall, a door opens and releases a colder current before closing again. For a moment, that cooler air resembles the outside world, though it vanishes before carrying any scent of grass or rain. The final choice remains with Thomas, but it has been shaped by years of pressure, missing memories, and promises made by people with power. Wicked has taught its subjects that survival may require obedience, while presenting obedience as a form of hope. Now the institution asks for a decision that could destroy or kill the subject, and calls that decision the final stage of research. Thomas sees that consent offered under such conditions would always be shadowed by the threat of abandonment. He chooses refusal because trust has been spent, not because the suffering beyond the walls has become unimportant. Low machinery continues beneath the laboratory, carrying the building through another hour without daylight. Dry air rests over your skin, and the smell of warmed plastic remains close to the monitors. The pulse-like tone sounds at regular intervals, calm enough to belong to a sleeping room. Medical paper rustles when a hidden vent releases another measured breath. Light pools around the instruments, leaving the corners pale and indistinct. The room has no natural darkness, yet the absence of windows creates another kind of night, made from uncertainty rather than shadow. Jansen's expression changes only slightly, but the disappointment beneath it becomes visible in the stillness of his mouth. He has spoken of Thomas as a person and as a solution, moving between those meanings without acknowledging the distance. The institution may continue its research, but the promised final answer cannot be separated from the subject who refuses to provide it. Thomas understands that wicked authority depends upon the belief that its purpose makes it trustworthy. Once that belief has failed, every reassurance sounds like another instrument of control. The choice cannot be handed back to the people who designed the danger. A monitor tone fades into the sealed air, leaving the room briefly occupied by the machinery below. The warmed plastic smell softens as the lights dim by an almost invisible degree. Dryness remains in your throat, while medical paper gives a final quiet rustle beneath the technician's hand. The floor's vibration passes through your shoes and settles into the chair. Somewhere beyond the glass, a filtered door releases a brief breath of colder air. It carries no forest scent, but the change is enough to remind you that the world continues outside. Later, Ava Page admits that Wicked original plan did not succeed. The confession does not restore what was taken, nor does it turn the experiments into necessary acts of kindness. It reveals instead that certainty had been claimed long before certainty existed. The maze, the scorch, and the trials produced suffering as well as information, while the promised cure remained incomplete. The survivors receive no universal cure for every infected person, and the catastrophe does not vanish beneath a final scientific answer. What remains is the knowledge that hope was real, but the institution's methods were not made innocent by it. The laboratory grows quiet as one bank of equipment powers down, leaving deeper stillness beneath the lights. Dry air passes over your face, carrying away the last trace of warmth from the instrument cabinet. The smell of plastic lingers in the corners, faint and artificial, like a memory attached to a place rather than a person. The monitor gives one pulse-like tone, then another, holding the room in measured suspension. Medical paper rests in pale layers, its edges gently curled. Beneath the floor, one remaining machine continues to turn, low and patient, guarding the building against the dark. You leave the final decision where it belongs, outside wicked hands, though the consequences remain uncertain and the dying remain beyond the walls. Newt's illness continues to make the cost immediate, while every distant victim gives the promise of a cure its terrible weight. The question has no peaceful answer, only the quiet recognition that one person cannot be converted into a guarantee. Thomas's resistance protects more than his own body, because it refuses to let suffering become permanent permission. The death cure remains a title balanced between hope and death, carrying both meanings through the sealed corridors. In the fading machinery, the promise grows quiet, but it does not disappear. The sealed corridors fall behind you as Thomas and his companions emerge into a city damaged by fire, disease, and the long pressure of human fear. Wicked forces occupy the streets, while cranks move through the ruined districts without any reliable pattern. Brenda leads you between broken walls, finding paths through the scorch where every familiar road has become uncertain. She knows which alleys remain open, which staircases have collapsed, and which dark windows may conceal danger. Jorge waits beyond the shattered avenue with his aircraft, an experienced pilot and former ally from the scorch, his knowledge now tied uneasily to the institution that once controlled so much of your life. Around you, Wicked and the Right Arm fight for the city, and every burst of violence makes the ground seem less dependable beneath your feet. Dust lies between the broken buildings in pale ridges, gathered beneath doorways and along the edges of abandoned vehicles. Rain slips through shattered glass, tapping softly on rooms where curtains still hang from crooked rails. The sour smell of abandoned streets rises from wet rubbish, rusted metal, and old food left too long in dark kitchens. Distant alarms call from one quarter of the city, then answer from another, making direction difficult to hold. Somewhere above you, loose signs creak against their brackets, while beneath them, voices echo in empty rooms with a softness that makes them seem far away. The light has a thin, grey quality, filtered through smoke and cloud, and cold air moves steadily through corridors where no doors remain to stop it. The escape has not given Thomas a clean victory over Wicked, because freedom in the scorch is measured by movement rather than certainty. You are still dependent on information supplied by former enemies, and every warning carries the possibility of a hidden purpose. Brenda knows how to cross the urban ruins because she has lived among their dangers, yet her knowledge remains connected to Wicked. Jorge understands the routes beyond the city and the machinery needed to carry you away, although his relationship with the institution has never been simple. The Right Arm opposes Wicked control, but its resistance brings fighting into the same streets where immunes are trying to survive. Between those forces, you move as a person wanted, studied, and sometimes protected by people whose intentions remain partly concealed. Rain gathers in the hollows of the pavement, trembling whenever distant vehicles pass through adjoining streets. A torn awning hangs over a shop front, releasing a slow thread of water beside a display window clouded with grime. Broken masonry presses against the road, and small pieces of glass shine beneath the mud like thin fragments of ice. The scent of damp plaster mingles with the sour odor rising from drains that have not been cleared. Far off, an alarm pulses at measured intervals, neither urgent nor calm, while the wind carries brief scraps of shouting through the empty blocks. Inside a roofless building, Rain touches exposed beams and falls through several floors, creating a patient rhythm that continues after the footsteps around you have faded. Brenda takes the lead when the streets narrow, lowering her voice and choosing routes that keep you away from the largest concentrations of wicked soldiers. She moves with the quiet confidence of someone who has learned to read ruins as carefully as other people read maps. Minho remains close to Thomas, practical and watchful, turning every available doorway, vehicle, and roofline into part of a tactical calculation. His leadership is no longer confined to the glade or the maze, because the city demands the same qualities in a harsher form. He measures distance, numbers, and escape routes, while Thomas listens for any sign of companions captured during the chaos. The search draws you deeper into danger, because Thomas repeatedly chooses rescue over safe withdrawal, even when the safest path lies clearly in the opposite direction. The interior of the building feels colder than the street, and water has spread across the floor in thin, uneven sheets. Rain touches the remaining panes above you, producing a scattered ticking that rises and fades with the wind. The air carries the sour smell of soaked timber and abandoned plaster, with a faint trace of smoke lodged in the walls. Dust has settled on desks, shelves, and overturned chairs, forming soft outlines around objects that no one has touched for months. From an upper room comes a murmur of voices, blurred by distance and empty space. Distant alarms pass through the walls as a dull vibration, while the broken windows allow the city's weather to enter without resistance. Thomas remembers Teresa as you move through the vacant rooms, and the memory occupies a complicated place within him. He believes that Teresa betrayed him during the earlier trials, when trust became another instrument in wicked hands. He remembers her choices as wounds made more painful because he once believed in her completely. Yet other memories resist that judgment, suggesting that Teresa may have been attempting to protect the group in the only ways available to her. The novel leaves her motives partly concealed, as it does with Brenda, Jorge, and several others who have survived by making compromises inside a violent system. Around Thomas, the ruins offer no clear evidence of innocence or guilt, and the uncertainty follows him as closely as the dust beneath his shoes. A narrow corridor opens into a room without a ceiling, where rain falls directly onto a collapsed table. Water darkens the boards and collects in the shallow grooves of the floor. Through the missing wall, you can see another building standing at an angle, its windows empty and its upper rooms exposed to the pale sky. Dust drifts through the opening whenever wind moves along the street. The sour smell of the abandoned district gathers around the doorway, sharpened by wet paper and decaying cloth. In the distance, alarms continue their slow exchange, and voices echoing in empty rooms seem to come from several directions at once. The city holds every sound for a moment before returning it changed. The evidence of the flare surrounds you in the damaged buildings, not as a single dramatic ruin, but as 1,000 smaller failures. Concrete has split around stairwells, metal doors hang open, and entire floors have folded into one another beneath weakened supports. The physical consequences of the flare remain visible in every district, showing how sickness and panic reshaped ordinary places into unstable landscapes. Cranks turn ordinary streets into unpredictable hazards, appearing from abandoned shops, service tunnels, and houses whose inhabitants once believed themselves secure. Their movements cannot be calculated like those of trained soldiers, and this uncertainty makes every crossing dangerous. Thomas understands that the city is not merely occupied by wicked forces and threatened by cranks. It has been transformed into a weapon against everyone within it. A loose sheet of glass shivers in a broken frame, catching the grey light before sliding several inches across the sill. Rain moves in fine threads down the remaining panes, gathering at the corners where dust has formed brown, soft-edged lines. The street below is quiet for several breaths, although the silence feels temporary rather than peaceful. A wet breeze carries the sour smell of rubbish and stagnant water through the open rooms. Far away, an alarm rises into a higher tone and then cuts off, leaving only the low creak of a damaged structure. From behind a wall, voices echo in empty rooms, one word separated from another by long intervals. The sound of water falling through the building gives the silence a shape you can almost hold. Minho finds the first indication that the captured companions have been taken towards a wicked-controlled section of the city. The information comes from someone who once served the institution and therefore cannot be accepted without caution. Still, the direction is specific, and the possibility of finding their friends outweighs the danger of following it. Thomas chooses to continue, as he has chosen before, because retreat would leave the others inside a system that treats human lives as useful material. Brenda studies the route and points out several places where cranks are known to gather. Jorge listens from beside the aircraft, his expression difficult to read, while fighting between Wicked and the right arm spreads across the nearby streets. The rescue mission becomes inseparable from the search for a future, because no future seems worth having if it requires leaving the others behind. Water runs along the curb in narrow brown channels, carrying ash, leaves, and scraps of printed paper towards a blocked drain. The walls beside you are rough with exposed brick, and their surfaces retain the dampness of the night. Broken windows admit the rain, which taps on shelves, metal pipes, and the warped lids of abandoned boxes. Dust clings to every object, becoming a fine paste where moisture reaches it. The sour smell of old streets settles low in the air, mixed with oil and the faint sweetness of rotting fruit. Distant alarms overlap beyond the buildings, and the echo of voices travels through empty rooms without revealing whether anyone is near. Even the smallest sound seems to belong to the whole wounded city. Brenda explains why she worked with Wicked, while the group waits in the shadow of a damaged transport depot. Her cooperation was not offered freely, because Wicked had placed her life under a threat that left little room for courage to appear uncomplicated. She worked with the institution to avoid execution, knowing that refusal might have ended her life before she could help anyone. The explanation does not erase the harm caused by her decisions, and Thomas does not accept it as a simple excuse. Yet the ruins make it difficult to imagine that anyone has moved through the scorch without fear shaping their choices. Brenda's connection to Wicked remains real, but so does the coercion that produced it, and Thomas must decide whether betrayal deserves punishment when survival has been made the price of obedience. The depot smells of wet concrete, oil and dust, stirred from beneath old machinery. Rain reaches the interior through long breaks in the roof, striking the metal floor in scattered patterns. Thin pools reflect the dark beams above, although the reflections break apart whenever drops touch the surface. A sour current of air enters through the loading doors, carrying the odor of abandoned streets and distant smoke. Somewhere behind the depot, an alarm repeats in a steady sequence, its sound softened by walls and rain. Voices echo from an empty office at the far end, but the words are too blurred to identify. Cold settles into the fabric of your clothing while the group waits without speaking. Jorge's story is equally connected to the institution through survival and coercion. He is an experienced pilot, familiar with the scorch, the aircraft, and the dangerous distances between settlements that have lost their roads. He was once an ally from the scorch, but his usefulness made him valuable to Wicked, and valuable people inside Wicked were rarely free. His cooperation has helped the survivors, yet it also places him among those whose knowledge comes from the same machinery they oppose. The survivors cannot easily distinguish helpers from handlers, because both may offer directions, shelter, transport, or warnings. Thomas watches Jorge prepare the aircraft and understands that the future may depend upon a man whose past cannot be separated cleanly from the institution's demands. Wind passes through the depot and lifts a veil of dust from beneath a row of abandoned vehicles. The powder moves in small waves across the floor before settling against the wheels. Rain strikes the roof in uneven bursts, loud over one section and barely audible over another. Water drips from a torn cable, touching the ground with a patient metallic sound. The smell of oil remains beneath the sharper sourness of the street, and wet fabric gives off the faint odor of cold soil. Beyond the loading doors, alarms continue to call across the city. Inside the office, voices echo from one vacant room to another, making the walls seem inhabited even when the corridors remain still. The fighting between Wicked and the right arm intensifies near the route to the holding facility. Wicked wants to preserve control over the immunes and the research built around them, while the right arm opposes that control and tries to break the institution's reach. Their conflict creates further danger for the very people each side claims to be protecting. Explosions disturb the streets, patrols change direction, and frightened cranks emerge from buildings that had appeared empty. Minho adjusts the rescue plan according to each new movement, keeping the group together while searching for a route through the disorder. Thomas sees how every alliance in the ruined world has become unstable, because opposition to Wicked does not always mean safety, and assistance from Wicked does not always mean betrayal. Shattered glass lies across the pavement beneath a balcony whose railing has fallen outward. Rain softens the dust and darkens the fragments, leaving them bright only where weak light touches their edges. The wind carries the sour smell of the abandoned street through gaps in the masonry. A broken alarm panel clicks intermittently, although its warning has long since lost any clear meaning. From the building beside you, voices echo in empty rooms, fading into the upper floors and returning as indistinct murmurs. Somewhere beyond the next intersection, boots strike wet stone in an ordered rhythm. The sounds of soldiers, cranks, water, and distant machinery merge until the city seems to breathe through its ruins. The holding facility occupies a former public building whose entrances have been reinforced with metal barriers and salvaged timber. Wicked soldiers guard the lower level, while the right arm attacks from neighboring streets with little concern for people trapped between them. Brenda finds a service passage beneath the rear wall, and Minho determines that it will bring you close to the rooms where the captured companions are being held. Thomas enters first with the others close behind, moving through darkness broken by strips of rainlight. He does not know whether the information guiding him came from a genuine sympathizer or from a handler leading the group into an ambush. Even so, he continues forward, because the possibility of rescue remains stronger than the certainty of danger outside. Water has entered the service passage through cracks in the foundation, covering the floor in a shallow, cold layer. Each step sends small ripples towards the walls, where dust has collected in pale bands. The air tastes of rust and damp stone, and the sour smell of the city reaches you through a narrow vent overhead. Rain ticks against a broken grate, while distant alarms pulse with a faint electronic sadness. From somewhere beyond the passage, voices echo in empty rooms, rising and falling without forming a complete sentence. The ceiling presses low above your head, and loose grit falls whenever movement shakes the older sections of masonry. The darkness does not feel absolute, because thin grey light continues to enter from the world above. At the first locked door, Minho studies the hinges and the corridor beyond them. His decisions remain practical, but they carry the weight of someone repeatedly forced to choose between lives. He directs one person towards the stairwell, another towards the rear entrance, and keeps Thomas near the center of the movement. The plan depends upon timing, silence, and information that may have been deliberately incomplete. When the lock yields, the group finds an empty room and a set of restraints abandoned beside a drain. The captured companions have been moved, but marks on the floor suggest that they were taken upwards. Thomas feels the familiar pull towards immediate action, and again the search draws him beyond the point where withdrawal would still be safe. Rain falls through a ceiling torn open by fire, touching the stairs in dark, irregular patches. The stone steps are coated with dust, which becomes slippery wherever water has reached it. Broken glass rests along the landings, mixed with paper, plaster, and small pieces of painted wood. The smell of abandoned streets rises through the stairwell, sour and damp, carrying traces of smoke from the floors above. A distant alarm sounds 3 times, then waits, while voices echo through the empty rooms beyond the walls. The air is colder near the upper levels, where the building opens towards the grey sky. Every handrail feels rough beneath your fingers, worn by years of use and neglect. Thomas encounters Teresa in memory as the group climbs, although she is not physically present in the ruined facility. Her face appears beside the earlier trials, beside the false confidence that Wicked could shape suffering into a cure. He believes she betrayed him, and that belief has become part of the structure through which he understands the past. Yet Thomas also remembers moments when Teresa acted as though danger mattered more than her own reputation. Her actions can be interpreted as attempts to protect the group, even when those actions caused pain and confusion. The novel keeps her motives partly concealed, refusing to make the past settle into a simple division between loyalty and betrayal. In the broken building, Thomas carries both versions of Teresa with him, and neither one is complete. A long corridor opens towards windows without glass, allowing rain to cross the floor in thin diagonal lines. The wall covering has peeled away in strips, exposing layers of faded paint and dark adhesive. Dust gathers beneath the radiators and along the edges of doors that no longer close. The air smells of wet plaster, rust, and the sour remains of rooms abandoned in haste. Outside, the city gives off a low mixture of alarms and engines, with occasional shouts carried upwards by the wind. Voices echo in empty rooms behind you, although their source remains hidden in the deeper interior. Rain touches the floor lightly enough to resemble fingers brushing paper. The upper rooms contain signs that the captured companions were held there briefly before being transferred again. A torn piece of clothing lies beneath a table, and a familiar mark has been scratched into the paint beside a sealed doorway. Minho recognizes the sign and uses it to estimate the direction of movement. Brenda studies a maintenance map taken from a Wicked office, while Jorge listens for aircraft engines beyond the roofline. Information from former enemies becomes necessary at every stage, even though each piece may have been shaped by fear or self-interest. Thomas knows that Wicked has not surrendered its control, and the right arm has not created safety merely by attacking it. The escape has opened a path, but the path remains bordered by institutions that still know how to close doors. The rain grows heavier above the roof, sending water through cracks in the ceiling and down the walls. Puddles spread across the corridor, reflecting pale openings where windows once held glass. Dust floats on the surface before sinking into darker water. A sour draft moves through the rooms, bringing the smell of wet rubbish and old smoke from the streets below. Distant alarms overlap with the low vibration of engines, and the whole building seems to tremble beneath the city's conflict. Voices echo from empty rooms at either end of the corridor, softened until they resemble speech remembered rather than speech heard. Cold air rests against your face while you wait for the next movement. Brenda leads you towards a rooftop passage that connects the facility to a neighboring building. She has crossed enough of the scorch to understand the direct routes are often the most dangerous, especially when soldiers and cranks move without order. At the same time, her knowledge remains inseparable from the work she once performed for Wicked. Thomas must decide whether to punish her betrayal or accept imperfect help that may preserve the lives of the captured companions. The decision does not become easier because Brenda speaks honestly, nor because her fear seems genuine. Survival has made nearly every person in the city both victim and participant. Thomas follows her across the passage, choosing trust provisionally, with no promise that the choice will remain safe. The rooftop passage is open to the weather, and rain moves across the broken tiles in bright, slanting lines. Fragments of glass crunch beneath your feet, softened by mud and fine dust. Water gathers in the hollows and runs towards the edge, where it falls into the street below. The sour smell of abandoned streets rises through the gaps between buildings, mixed with smoke and wet stone. Alarms sound from the district behind you, and another warning answers from the riverward side. Voices echo in empty rooms beneath the roof, becoming faint as the wind crosses the open structure. The clouds hang low above the damaged city, leaving the daylight pale and without warmth. The neighboring building reveals a temporary wicked command post, but the rooms have been abandoned in haste. Maps remain fixed to the walls, and several radio sets continue to emit broken fragments of speech. Minho searches the tables for movement reports, while Jorge identifies a flight route that could carry the survivors beyond the fighting. Thomas finds a record indicating that the captured companions have been moved towards a transit station under right arm pressure. The institution and its opponent have both been using the same network of tunnels and supply roads, making their boundaries almost impossible to follow. Brenda recognizes a code attached to the record and admits that it comes from a wicked handler she once obeyed. Her knowledge opens the next route, but it also reminds everyone that assistance may arrive wearing the face of control. Rainwater runs from the maps onto the floor, carrying black ink into thin branching stains. The radios hiss beneath the broken voices, sometimes producing a word before dissolving into static. Dust settles on the tables in soft layers, disturbed only where papers have been moved. The windows admit a sour current from the street, scented with wet concrete and rotting vegetation. Beyond the glassless frames, distant alarms flicker through the sound of rainfall. In the rooms below, voices echo against bare walls, carrying upwards through shafts where staircases have collapsed. The light changes slowly as clouds pass over the city, leaving the interiors alternately silver and dim. Thomas and the others reach the transit station, while wicked soldiers withdraw from one entrance and the right arm advances through another. Cranks gather along the surrounding streets, drawn by noise, movement, and the confusion of armed groups. The captured companions are somewhere beneath the station, and the only route downward lies through a concourse filled with abandoned luggage and overturned barriers. Minho forms the group into a compact line, assigning each person a direction to watch. Brenda points out a service lift that may still function, while Jorge remains above with the aircraft ready. Thomas hears the distant movement of cranks and chooses the lower passage, knowing that rescue now depends upon entering the most dangerous part of the station. The station concourse holds the dampness of a place sealed for too long. Rain falls through the broken roof and touches the rails with small, bright flashes. Dust coats the benches, ticket machines, and handles of luggage left beside the walls. A sour smell rises from the tracks, where stagnant water has gathered around old cables and paper cups. Distant alarms reverberate through the tunnels, becoming deeper as they travel beneath the ground. Voices echo in empty rooms above the platforms, and the echoes seem to multiply whenever wind moves through the broken entrances. The air is cold enough to make every breath feel visible, although no mist remains for more than a moment. The service lift carries the group downward in slow, reluctant stages, stopping once between floors while the lights fade almost completely. Minho steadies the door and listens for movement beyond it. Brenda holds the damaged map against the wall, tracing the route with one finger while Thomas watches the darkness below. The lift opens onto a maintenance level where wicked equipment has been arranged beside temporary cells. Several doors stand open, and the rooms contain signs of recent occupation. A voice calls from behind a reinforced barrier, and Thomas recognizes one of his captured companions. Rescue is close enough to touch, yet every corridor still offers another place for a soldier or crank to wait. Below the station, rain reaches you only as faint tapping through layers of concrete. Water threads along the walls, shining briefly beneath weak lamps before disappearing into cracks. Dust has collected in the corners of the cells, and dampness has turned it into pale clumps. The sour smell of the abandoned city remains in the ventilation system, carrying old rubbish and smoke through narrow metal grills. Distant alarms become muted pulses, while voices echo in empty rooms farther along the maintenance level. Pipes contract above your head with soft clicks, and somewhere behind the walls, water moves through the building with a steady underground murmur. Thomas reaches the barrier, but the locking mechanism has been sealed from the other side. Minho searches for a manual release, while Brenda checks the corridor for approaching footsteps. The captured companion gives directions through the barrier, explaining that another group has been taken towards the western platform. That information means the rescue cannot end with one door because several lives remain divided through the station. Thomas feels the familiar conflict between urgency and caution, yet his decision is immediate. He will not leave the others behind simply because one person has been found. The search continues, and with it, the deeper understanding that a future built upon partial rescue would still resemble wicked arithmetic. Water drips from the ceiling above the western platform, striking the rails in a slow, hollow rhythm. The platform tiles are cracked, their surfaces dulled by dust and dampness. Rain has entered through a broken stairwell, carrying leaves and the sour smell of streets left without care. Alarms tremble through the tunnel walls, joined by indistinct voices echoing in empty rooms beyond the tracks. The air smells of rust, wet stone, and old electrical wiring. A weak lamp flickers near the far end, casting a narrow reflection across the water. The station feels suspended between departure and ruin, holding the remains of a city that no longer knows where its people belong. The western platform is occupied by a small wicked unit attempting to move the remaining captives before the right arm reaches the station. Minho directs the rescue with precise, economical commands, using pillars and abandoned equipment as cover. Thomas crosses the platform when an opening appears, and Brenda moves beside him despite the risk that her former handlers may recognize her. The fight is brief but disorienting, broken by shouted orders and the sudden movement of cranks entering through the street-level stairs. Jorge's aircraft passes above the station, drawing attention away from the platform long enough for the captives to escape. In the confusion, Thomas sees the pattern of his life repeating once more, with rescue demanding choices that safety would never permit. The wind from the aircraft pushes rain through the broken stairwell and across the platform. Dust lifts from the tiles, turning briefly in the light before settling against the walls. Glass fragments shift beneath hurried feet, making a soft, brittle sound beneath the larger disturbance overhead. The sour smell of the streets descends with the rain, mixed with fuel and the cold scent of wet metal. Alarms continue from several districts, although their meanings have become difficult to separate. Voices echo in empty rooms above the station, and crank cries travel through the stairwell with sudden, uneven force. Water runs along the edge of the platform while the group gathers those who have been freed. The rescued companions emerge shaken, exhausted, and uncertain whether the people who opened their cells are friends. Their suspicion is reasonable, because Wicked has sometimes offered help for reasons that only became visible later. The right arm has also treated people as pieces in a larger struggle, and its opposition to Wicked does not remove every danger from its methods. Thomas understands that the survivors remain dependent on information supplied by former enemies, including Brenda and Jorge. Their guidance has carried the group through the city, but it cannot guarantee what waits beyond the next passage. The companions move together towards the surface, carrying fear, exhaustion, and fragile evidence that cooperation may still be possible. The stairwell smells of wet dust and old smoke, and rainwater slips down the center of every step. Shattered glass rests in the corners, reflecting the grey daylight above. The walls hold the sour dampness of abandoned streets, while cold air moves downwards from the open entrance. Alarms sound beyond the station, separated by distance and layers of damaged stone. Voices echo in empty rooms at the upper landings, blending with the uneven movement of people climbing. Water gathers beneath your shoes and spreads across the worn steps. The city remains above you, ruined and watchful, its weather passing through every opening left by the flare. At the surface, Wicked and the right arm continue fighting around the station, though neither side controls the whole district. Jorge brings the aircraft low enough for the survivors to reach it, while Brenda searches for the final route through the barricades. Minho counts the rescued companions and checks each person for injuries before allowing anyone to board. Thomas looks back towards the station and understands that the escape has not ended the struggle. Friends have been recovered, but Wicked still holds information, resources, and people who may be needed later. The right arm remains committed to breaking institutional control, yet its battle has made the city more dangerous for every immune caught within it. The future remains somewhere beyond the ruins, but reaching it will require the same imperfect alliances that carried you here. Rain covers the aircraft's metal frame in a shifting sheen, and the sound of drops gathers beneath the deeper vibration of the engine. Dust clings to the lower panels, darkening where water touches it. The sour smell of the city surrounds the machine, carrying wet ash, oil, and the remains of homes left open to the weather. Broken windows shine across the street, each holding a small reflection of the pale sky. Alarms fade and return as the wind changes direction. Voices echo from empty rooms inside the station, growing quieter as the aircraft begins to lift. Beneath you, water runs through the gutters, and the ruined streets slowly lose their sharp edges in the rain. Thomas carries Teresa's memory into the aircraft beside the rescued companions. He still believes she betrayed him during the earlier trials, and he cannot simply remove that belief because other interpretations have become possible. Her actions may have been attempts to protect the group, but protection offered through deception can feel indistinguishable from harm. Brenda's explanation has shown him that survival may produce choices which appear cruel when separated from the fear that shaped them. Jorge's history has offered the same lesson from another direction, linking skill and loyalty to coercion inside Wicked. Thomas does not forgive everyone, and he does not abandon his judgment, but he begins to understand that punishment cannot restore the world they lost. The aircraft rises through rain and smoke, leaving the station beneath a thin veil of cloud. Water beads along the windows and slides backwards in narrow trails as the machine gains height. Dust remains caught in the seams of the cabin, carrying the dry, faintly bitter scent of the buildings below. Through the glass, the city appears as a field of broken roofs, dark streets, and scattered reflections. Distant alarms become small and irregular, no longer tied to any single place. The sour smell of abandoned streets fades beneath the colder air around the aircraft. Inside the cabin, voices echo softly between the metal walls, while the engine holds a steady note beneath them. The city recedes, but the conflict that shaped it remains within Thomas and the others. Wicked has not been defeated, the right arm has not made the world secure, and the cranks still move through the streets below. The rescue has brought friends back into the group, yet it has also shown how easily every refuge can become another trap. Minho continues to hold the survivors together through practical attention, counting supplies and deciding where the aircraft can safely land. Brenda sits near the rear, her cooperation with Wicked now understood as an effort to avoid execution rather than a simple declaration of loyalty. Jorge remains at the controls, connected to the institution through coercion and survival. Around them, the search for friends becomes inseparable from the search for a future. Clouded light spreads across the aircraft's interior, touching wet clothing and tired faces with muted silver. Rain continues along the windows, though the drops now move in long, quiet paths. The air smells of metal, fabric, and the faint residue of smoke carried from the city. Dust rests in the folds of seats and gathers beneath the equipment cases. Far below, alarms are reduced to distant pulses, almost lost beneath the engine's constant sound. Voices echo gently through the cabin when someone speaks, softened by the enclosed space and the exhaustion of the journey. The cold that entered from the broken city remains for a while, then gradually gives way to the warmer breath of the aircraft. Thomas looks towards the fading skyline and sees the physical consequences of the flare spread beneath the rain. The ruined buildings show what happens when sickness, fear, and authority reinforce one another over time. Ordinary streets have become hazards, and familiar names now belong to places of detention, battle, or loss. The survivors cannot easily distinguish helpers from handlers, because their lives have been shaped by people who often occupied both roles. Thomas's repeated choice of rescue over withdrawal has carried him farther into danger than any careful plan would have allowed. Still, the rescue companions sit beside him, alive and moving towards another uncertain place. That fact does not solve the future, but it gives the future a human shape. Rain softens the skyline until the tallest ruins appear as pale silhouettes beneath the cloud. The aircraft windows hold small, trembling reflections of instruments and faces. Dust moves lightly whenever the cabin shifts, carrying a dry trace of the city into warmer air. The sour smell of abandoned streets has almost disappeared, replaced by fuel, canvas, and damp clothing. The engine's low vibration passes through the floor and settles into the body as a steady rhythm. Voices echo only briefly now, since most of the companions have grown quiet. Beyond the glass, weather closes over the damaged city, leaving its alarms faint beneath the falling rain. No one in the aircraft possesses the whole truth, and the novel keeps several characters' motives partly concealed, even as the survivors depend upon them. Teresa remains both betrayal and possible protection in Thomas's memories. Brenda remains both former collaborator and frightened survivor. Jorge remains both skilled ally and man, connected to Wicked through coercion. The right arm remains an opponent of institutional control, whose methods can still place immunes in danger. Minho remains the practical and tactical leader who turns confusion into movement. Together, these imperfect figures carry the group beyond the city, not because trust has become easy, but because the need for a future has become greater than the comfort of certainty. Outside, rain continues to cross the dark aircraft windows in patient lines. The city's dust lies below the cloud, hidden among broken buildings and empty rooms. Somewhere beneath those ruins, water still moves through the streets, touching glass, ash, and stone. The sour smell of abandonment lingers in places where no aircraft can reach. Distant alarms fade into the weather, and voices echo in vacant rooms until even the echoes grow quiet. Inside the cabin, the engine maintains its measured note, steady enough to accompany thought without demanding it. Thomas holds the rescue companions within his attention, while the uncertain future travels silently ahead through the rain. The cabin moves through rain-dark country, while Newt's breathing grows thinner, and the quiet engine carries each small sound into the spaces between the survivors. Thomas sits near him, watching the pale movement of his face, as though attention alone might keep the illness from advancing. Newt's voice has weakened to a dry murmur, and several times Thomas leans close before understanding the words. The flare has made Newt increasingly vulnerable, taking strength from him in ways that courage cannot prevent or even measure. No one in the cabin possesses a complete account of immunity, because Wicked kept its knowledge divided among laboratories, files, handlers, and frightened minds. Some subjects resisted exposure, others endured infection for a time, and a few appeared untouched by the disease. The immune subjects were therefore valuable to Wicked, not as people with histories and loyalties, but as possible survivors of the flare. Thomas has always resisted that division, although his own memories were damaged by the same institution that sought to understand the human mind. He remembers the maze as a place of walls, stone, sunlight, and fear, where every friendship was formed beneath an invisible experiment. He remembers the Scorch as a country of heat, ruined streets, violent skies, and decisions made before anyone understood their consequences. Around the cabin, rain gathers upon the windows in trembling lines, joining and separating as the vehicle crosses broken roads. The glass is cold beside your hand, and faint beads of water blur the dark fields into long bands of grey. A weakening voice rises from the rear compartment, then sinks beneath the engine's measured vibration before the sentence has reached its end. Dust has settled into the seams of the seats, although the cabin was cleaned before departure, and it shifts whenever the wheels pass over a rut. The air carries traces of wet fabric, ash, old plaster, and the metallic scent of equipment stored too long without use. Each breath seems to draw the ruined world inward, bringing abandoned buildings, flooded avenues, and distant fires into the narrow space around you. Beyond the window, a sudden rush of cold air enters through a damaged seal, touching your face before the vent is closed again. Nothing in the cabin is entirely still, because loose straps, folded blankets, and small instruments tremble with the movement of the road. Thomas remembers that Newt had once moved through the maze with a confidence that made danger seem familiar rather than final. He remembers the way Newt spoke to the others, carrying authority without demanding obedience, and how often his calm concealed exhaustion. Now the illness has turned the cure debate into private grief, because every argument about survival leads back to the body lying nearby. Wicked leadership continues to defend the trials as necessary, claiming that terrible conditions were required to reveal patterns hidden within the human response. Ava Page is associated with that leadership, though surviving records reveal a woman increasingly troubled by the distance between intention and consequence. Thomas cannot accept the language of useful loss when Newt's hands shake and his thoughts wander beyond ordinary conversation. The old reasoning remains powerful, however, because the flare has taken millions, and a possible cure can appear to outweigh any individual claim. In the darkness beneath the cabin's roof, Newt asks Thomas whether the others have gone ahead, and the answer requires more tenderness than certainty. Thin sheets of rain slide across the roof, joining the soft patter with heavier tapping where water has found exposed metal. Cold air continues to pass through the cabin in brief movements, carrying the scent of soaked earth and distant smoke. The floor vibrates beneath your feet, and the vibration travels upward through the frame, through the seat, and into the bones of your legs. Somewhere above, dust falls from a damaged ceiling panel, descending in a pale veil that catches against the weak interior light. The particles rest upon dark coats and blankets, leaving small marks like ash upon the fabric, while no one has the strength to brush them away. Thomas thinks of the people lost across the maze and the Scorch, names arriving separately and then gathering into one unmanageable weight. Albie is there in memory, along with Chuck, Winston, and the others whose lives were shortened by choices made inside Wicked design. The list does not remain orderly, because grief moves through recollection without respecting the sequence of places or the official purpose of an experiment. Thomas remembers faces before he remembers their deaths, which makes the losses feel briefly reversible and then more painful when reality returns. Every survivor carries a private arrangement of these memories, and none of them can be certain that the arrangement belongs entirely to them. The question of immunity has never been only scientific, because the immune subjects were also children, friends, prisoners, and unwilling witnesses. A successful experiment would not automatically justify the suffering used to produce it, even if the result could protect an entire population. That distinction remains clear to Thomas while Newt lies beside him, yet the need for a cure makes clarity feel insufficient. A low groan travels through the cabin when the vehicle turns across a bridge, and the sound resembles concrete shifting beneath a damaged building. Rainwater trembles in shallow pools along the roadside, reflecting broken lamps and the pale openings of houses without roofs. The night has no single color, because blue-gray cloud, black water, orange firelight, and white mist overlap across the distant landscape. Your clothing holds the cold gathered from the outside air, while dried ash remains caught at the edge of one sleeve. Plaster dust has settled within the folds of a blanket, softening its surface and giving it the faint smell of a deserted room. The engine resumes its steady note after the bridge, and the interior light dims each time the road passes beneath leaning structures. Newt's weakening voice becomes almost inaudible, and Thomas feels the helplessness of listening without possessing words that might change anything. Newt's condition forces him to confront a limit that courage cannot remove, because bravery can carry a person towards suffering without carrying them beyond it. Thomas cannot restore every damaged memory, although he has spent years trying to understand what was taken and what remains. He cannot save every infected friend, even when he knows their names, remembers their gestures, and holds their hands as the disease advances. The knowledge leaves no room for the simple idea that determination will eventually defeat every obstacle. Wicked had built its method around limits, measuring fear, memory, loyalty, pain, and recovery, as though every human response could be converted into evidence. Its leaders believed that the population-level threat permitted extraordinary measures, and the threat was real enough to make their argument difficult to dismiss. Yet personal loyalty stood beside population-level survival, refusing to disappear merely because one side of the debate used larger numbers. Thomas sees that the institution has confused a difficult moral choice with permanent permission to continue choosing in its own favor. Scientific necessity can become a permanent excuse when every failure is described as a reason for one further trial. The cabin passes a line of trees bent by wind, and their branches scrape softly across the outer panels. Water runs from the roof in narrow streams, spilling past the windows and breaking the reflections into wavering fragments. A sudden rush of cold air enters when a rear door shifts against its lock, and several people turn before anyone speaks. The air settles again, but the chill remains against your cheeks, thin and persistent beneath the warmer layers of clothing. Dust moves from the ceiling with each heavy impact beneath the wheels, forming faint clouds above the seats. Ash and plaster mark the survivors' clothes, and the pale residue gathers at collars, cuffs, and the edges of worn boots. Newt turns his head towards Thomas, and for a moment the illness seems to retreat behind an expression Thomas recognizes. The moment does not last, but it is enough to recall the old Newt, the one who could make a room feel organized. Thomas remembers Newt's friendship as a form of shelter, though neither of them would have used such a gentle word in the maze. He remembers how often Newt stood between panic and violence, carrying the burden of keeping frightened people together. Now Thomas cannot stand between Newt and the flare because the disease does not respond to threats, loyalty, or physical strength. The possibility of a cure remains present, but its promise has become distant, surrounded by broken facilities and records that contradict one another. Some immune subjects may survive exposure, and their blood, memories, or neural responses might still contain the answer Wicked sought. Thomas understands the value of that information, but he refuses to reduce Newt or anyone else to biological material. Leadership has called such refusal sentimental, even dangerous, because hesitation can appear cruel when millions are waiting for relief. The distinction between saving humanity and sacrificing people for humanity grows harder to hold as the road carries them away from the ruins. Cold rain taps against the windows with a patient irregularity, sometimes fading into mist and sometimes striking the glass with greater force. Loose fragments beneath the seats shift whenever the cabin moves, making a small dry sound beneath the breathing of the passenger. Somewhere near the front, a piece of metal vibrates against its fastening, producing a thin note that disappears whenever the engine changes pitch. The ceiling gives another soft fall of dust, and the particles settle upon your shoulders like powder from an old wall. Your hands remain warm inside the sleeves, though the air entering through the damaged seal cools the skin around your wrists. Outside, wet stones gleam beside the road, and shallow water carries leaves, ash, and pale fragments of plaster towards lower ground. The world seems to have been reduced to surfaces, sounds, and movement, while Thomas measures the distance between Newt's breaths. Newt's illness has made the future feel less like a destination and more like an argument that the body is already losing. The survivors know that the immunes are valuable because they may survive exposure to the flare, but survival does not promise restoration. They will not be given an easy return to the old world, because that world has been damaged by the same structures that claim to preserve it. Their survival depends upon leaving the old political order behind, including wicked authority and the assumptions that allowed its experiments to continue. Paige eventually recognizes that the search for a cure has failed, though her recognition arrives after countless lives have been placed within the experiment. Her account does not erase the deaths caused by Wicked, and it cannot turn intention into innocence. Failure may explain the institution's collapse, but explanation is not absolution, especially for those whose suffering supplied the evidence. Thomas hears fragments of Paige's reasoning in his memory, shaped by documents, conversations, and the weary confidence of a woman defending impossible decisions. He wonders whether she truly believed the cost could be redeemed, or whether belief had become another instrument of obedience. The road narrows between ruined walls, and rainwater shines across the surface like a thin layer of dark glass. A cold current moves through the cabin from front to back, passing over damp hair and the exposed skin of tired faces. The smell of wet concrete rises whenever the tires cross flooded sections, mingling with the smoke that hangs above the distant streets. Ash clings to the hem of your coat, and plaster dust gathers in the crease where your sleeve bends. Beyond the window, an empty tower fades into the cloud, its upper floors open to the weather and its lower rooms hidden in darkness. The groan of collapsing concrete comes from somewhere beyond the road, deep enough to seem part of the earth itself. For a while, no one speaks, and the silence is filled by water, machinery, and the slow movement of breath. Thomas thinks of Teresa, whose name has remained difficult to place among the simple categories of friend and enemy. Their history contains trust and betrayal, shared memories and altered memories, affection beside suspicion, and loyalties that changed under pressure. Teresa made one final attempt to demonstrate her loyalty when the facility began to collapse around them. She moved towards Thomas as falling debris opened a gap beneath his feet, and her decision was faster than any explanation. The groan of concrete became a roar, while dust poured from the ceilings and turned the corridors into a pale storm. Thomas felt himself falling, then felt Teresa reach him, and the next moments survive only as fragments of noise, weight, and pain. She died while trying to save Thomas from the falling debris, giving her final action a clarity that their past had often lacked. Thomas survived, but survival did not become triumph, because Teresa's absence remained within the space where her body had been. Around you, the cabin seems smaller as Thomas remembers the facility, its corridors choked with dust, and its lights failing one after another. A fine powder lies over the floorboards, shifting into faint patterns whenever someone moves a boot or turns beneath a blanket. The air tastes of limestone and smoke, with a bitter edge that catches in the throat and makes every swallow deliberate. Rain strikes the roof above in uneven clusters, as though the storm is moving across the cabin rather than falling upon it. The windows have fogged at their edges, leaving narrow, clear spaces through which the ruined landscape appears and disappears. Cold air presses inward through the seams, touching the back of your neck before the surrounding warmth gradually returns. Thomas grieves Teresa despite their history of mistrust, because grief does not require a perfect record of loyalty. He recalls the frightened girl beneath the maze's artificial sky, the companion beside him in the scorch, and the person who chose to return. The final sacrifice cannot erase every deception, yet it cannot be reduced to another deception either. Human beings remain larger than the roles assigned to them, and Teresa's death leaves that truth painfully present. Thomas understands that her final loyalty was not a clean answer to their past, but it was still loyalty. The memory brings no comfort that can be trusted, only a quiet recognition that love and suspicion had occupied the same life. The survivor's losses are connected to decisions made by Wicked, even when particular deaths arose from individual fear or sudden chance. Teresa's death occurred during the collapse of the institution, but that collapse followed years of controlled suffering. Thomas can trace a line from the maze to the scorch, from the scorch to the facility, and from the facility towards the uncertain road ahead. The line does not make each event simple, because responsibility travels through many hands and often hides behind official language. Still, the survivors know that their losses did not happen outside history, and Wicked cannot place them beyond its own account. Leadership defended the trials as necessary, while the trials produced children who were expected to accept necessity as their only explanation. A cold wind moves through the broken shell of a nearby building, producing a low tone that rises and fades like distant singing. Rainwater drips from a roofless room, each drop landing upon stone with a measured, hollow sound. The ruined walls hold the night air, and your face feels the temperature change whenever the cabin passes an opening. Dust continues to fall from unseen ledges, settling upon blackened beams and the shoulders of people who have stopped trying to remain clean. A layer of ash covers the roadside grass, muting its color beneath the wet sheen left by the storm. The smell of plaster grows stronger near the collapsed structures, carrying a dry mineral note beneath the dampness. Nothing announces where one disaster ends and another begins, because broken roads and unlit buildings continue beyond the reach of sight. Newt wakes again and speaks Thomas's name, but the name seems to travel through a great distance before reaching him. Thomas answers immediately, yet Newt's expression shows that the answer has become less important than the sound of being answered. The flare has taken parts of Newt's mind, leaving moments of confusion between the memories he wants and those he cannot hold. He knows that something is wrong, although the shape of the wrongness changes whenever he tries to describe it. Thomas remembers that Wicked measured such changes, recording them as symptoms, variables, and possible evidence for another round of treatment. That language now feels unbearable because every measurement includes a person who is already afraid. Newt once asked Thomas to stop him if the illness made him dangerous, and the request remains lodged within Thomas like a piece of glass. Courage cannot remove the limit between a promise and an impossible cure, and Thomas knows that the limit is drawing close. Cloud moves over the road in pale layers, illuminated by occasional light from fires burning far beyond the ruined settlement. The cabin's windows reflect tired faces more clearly than they reveal the landscape, creating a second interior floating over the darkness. A soft current enters beneath the door, carrying wet leaves against the threshold before the wheels pull the vehicle forward. The engine's vibration passes through the wooden floor and keeps time with the small movements of hands, shoulders, and breathing bodies. Your coat feels rough where plaster dust has dried upon it, and the fabric releases a faint powder whenever you shift. The roof gives a long metallic groan as wind presses against it, followed by a brief silence that feels unusually wide. Newt's voice weakens further, but Thomas continues speaking to him about ordinary details that do not require memory. He mentions the road, the rain, and the names of people traveling with them, placing each fact carefully within the dark. Newt listens without answering for some time, and Thomas cannot tell whether the silence means sleep, confusion, or exhaustion. The cure debate has become inseparable from Newt's body, because every theory now arrives beside a person who may not live long enough to benefit. Wicked leadership would call the loss regrettable, then place it within the necessary cost of preserving the population. Thomas hears the argument and understands its strength, which makes his refusal more difficult rather than less sincere. A larger number does not make an individual life empty, and a desperate future does not grant unlimited authority to the present. The old political order demanded obedience from the immunes, then presented their survival as a debt owed to the institution. Thomas begins to see that escape may be the only remaining form of resistance, because no argument can change a system that treats disagreement as data. The road opens onto a wide plain where rain has covered the ground in shallow reflective sheets. Cold air enters when the front hatch lifts briefly, carrying the smell of fuel, wet ash, and distant vegetation. The sound of water striking metal becomes softer as the storm moves eastwards, though the sky remains heavy and without stars. A loose panel above the rear seats sheds another handful of dust, and the particles drift through the lamp's weak yellow circle. Ash has darkened the cuffs of your trousers, while a white smear of plaster crosses the fabric near your knee. The cabin smells of damp wool, old smoke, and the faint medicinal sharpness of supplies packed for a journey without a certain end. Thomas thinks of the survivors as people who have escaped one enclosure while carrying pieces of it within themselves. Their memories are damaged, their friendships altered, and their understanding of the world shaped by tests whose meaning was hidden from them. No easy return waits beyond the horizon, because the old society has been weakened by disease, violence, and the collapse of trust. The immunes may possess the biological possibility of survival, but they do not possess a ready-made home. They must decide what kind of community can follow Wicked, and which habits of command must end with its laboratories. The final moral choice concerns who has the right to decide humanity's future, not merely who possesses the most convincing scientific evidence. Thomas recognizes that authority cannot be justified only by intelligence, intention, or the size of the population threatened. A successful experiment could have saved lives, but success would not have transformed coerced subjects into willing participants. Rainwater runs beneath the wheels and gathers in long channels that reflect the cabin's lamps as broken, golden lines. The air inside grows warmer for several minutes, then cools when a seam opens along the rear wall. Your face receives the chill first, followed by your hands and the exposed skin above the collar of your coat. Beyond the glass, wet branches bend across the road, their leaves shining briefly before disappearing into darkness. A distant structure gives way with the groan of collapsing concrete, and the sound travels over the plain without finding an answer. The cabin continues forwards through the noise, carrying breath, grief, equipment, and the fragile beginnings of another order. Thomas understands that survival cannot be interpreted as a reward because too many people were denied the chance to reach it. He has survived the maze, the scorch, the facility, and the collapse, but each survival has left someone else behind. Teresa's death stands beside Newt's illness, and both are connected to choices made by people who believed they were protecting humanity. The connection does not make Thomas responsible for every death, but it prevents him from calling the losses accidental. Page's eventual recognition of failure offers knowledge without repair, and knowledge without repair can resemble another form of cruelty. Wicked reached the limit of its method, though the method itself had already exceeded the limits of what its subjects could endure. The institution's failure does not erase the deaths caused by its experiments, nor does the existence of a genuine threat excuse every decision. Thomas carries that understanding into the uncertain morning, where escape offers distance, but not innocence. The first pale light appears behind the clouds, spreading over flooded ground and the broken edges of distant buildings. Rain hangs in the air as fine mist, and each droplet catches the weak dawn before vanishing against dark surfaces. A cold current passes through the cabin once more, gentler now, carrying the smell of wet grass beneath the ash. Dust lies along the window frame in a narrow, pale line, disturbed only where someone has rested a hand. The clothing around you feels heavy with moisture, while plaster powder remains dry in the folds and seams. Newt sleeps, or seems to sleep, and his breathing creates a fragile rhythm beneath the engine and the distant weather. Thomas watches the dawn without mistaking it for a beginning that can undo what has happened. He remembers Newt's voice before the flare weakened it, Teresa's final movement beneath the falling debris, and the friends lost in the maze. He remembers the scorch, the tests, the rooms of Wicked, and the people who insisted that necessity could bear any weight. The survivors understand that leaving is not victory, but it may be the only act still available to them. They cannot restore every damaged memory, save every infected friend, or rebuild the world according to the plans of those who controlled them. They can carry the names forwards, refuse the old political order, and make decisions without pretending that suffering becomes acceptable when it produces knowledge. The cost of an experiment remains visible in every quiet face, every weakened voice, and every person who reaches the morning without believing it has redeemed the night. You remain among the broken rooms, where the last instructions have been reduced to a few words, a direction, and the fading authority of Ava Page's voice. The message waits in a place built for observation, surrounded by dark screens and the quiet remains of machines that once measured pain as carefully as a physician measures a pulse. Ava Page leaves Thomas a message after Wicked plan collapses, and every word carries the weight of a decision made too late. You listen without accepting everything. Page directs Thomas towards a place where the immunes can live apart from the old society, beyond the laboratories, the committees, and the hands that have arranged every trial. She describes the destination as protected and green, a refuge concealed from the damaged world, where the surviving children may begin again. Her directions lead you through corridors of concrete and dust. The air tastes of metal near the abandoned equipment, while faint warmth gathers beneath the emergency lights. Cables lie across the floor like dark roots, and the walls retain pale squares where instruments have been removed. Somewhere beyond the sealed doors, machinery ticks once, then falls silent. You carry Page's message through the remains of the institution. No one can tell whether the final instruction is an act of mercy, another experiment, or the last movement of a plan still concealed from you. Wicked has spoken through false memories, locked doors, medicines, threats, and carefully arranged losses, so trust does not return simply because the voice has grown tired. The survivors move together because separation has become more frightening than uncertainty. Minho becomes the practical leader of the surviving group, not because anyone gives him a title, but because he counts supplies, checks injuries, remembers names, and decides which passage can still be crossed. He speaks plainly, with the hard patience of someone who has learned that survival depends upon ordinary tasks. You follow Minho through the facility's lower levels. The concrete slopes beneath your boots, carrying a thin film of moisture that catches the dim light. Broken glass rests in corners, and the smell of dust has replaced the sharp odor of antiseptic. Each footstep travels ahead of you, then returns from the walls in a softened echo. Ava Page's directions lead towards the flat trans. The vehicle waits behind a reinforced gate, its surface dull beneath a powdering of grey dust. Machinery surrounds it on every side, though much of the equipment has been abandoned and no technician remains to explain what the controls will do. Minho examines the flat trans with practical caution. You watch his hands move over the panels, checking power connections, restraints, and the narrow display that still shows a sequence of green symbols. Thomas follows Page's final directions with incomplete trust, carrying the message inside your thoughts like a map whose edges have been burned. The group enters the vehicle without ceremony. There is no speech to make the departure meaningful, because everyone inside already understands what the laboratories have taken. The doors close upon the concrete corridors, and the flat trans begins to hum beneath your feet. Mechanical noise fills the enclosed space. Fans turn somewhere above you, forcing air through narrow vents with a dry, constant breath. The seats are hard beneath your back, and the interior smells faintly of rubber, old wiring, and cold metal. Through a small reinforced window, laboratory lights pass in thin white bands. You leave the institution behind in stages. The flat trans descends first, moving through a sealed passage beneath the facility, then rises towards an outer door that has not opened for many years. The transition is so smooth that your body recognizes it only through changes in pressure and the gradual disappearance of mechanical vibration. Beyond the doors, the world is open. Concrete gives way to soil, machinery gives way to grass, and the grey enclosure of Wicked ends behind you without a final wall or declaration. The flat trans travels across a narrow track bordered by weeds, carrying the immunes away from laboratories that have assigned meaning to every scar. You see green space spreading beneath the afternoon light. Long grass moves in the wind, bending in broad waves that begin near the vehicle and travel towards distant trees. Warm sunlight passes through leaves above the track, breaking into shifting patterns across the ground. Birdsong appears where mechanical noise once ruled. One bird calls from a hidden branch, and another answers beyond the slope. The sounds are uncertain and scattered, yet they belong to a world that has not been constructed for observation. The journey continues through a landscape Page describes as lush and protected. Trees gather close around the track, their branches forming a loose canopy that allows sunlight to fall in warm pieces. Vines cling to low trunks, and small flowers grow beside exposed stones. The vegetation is dense enough to conceal the vehicle from any distant road. Clean water runs nearby. You hear it before you see it, moving over shallow rock with a sound too gentle to compete with the wind. The stream is clear beneath the sunlight, and pale sand shows through its depth. Minho directs the group towards the water. He divides the remaining food, identifies the injured, and chooses a place where the trees provide shelter without blocking the view of the surrounding hills. He asks for watches through the night, though no one knows what danger may cross the open ground. The community begins with instructions about firewood and water. Someone gathers branches beneath a cedar, while another person washes blood from a torn sleeve. A few survivors inspect the flat trans, wondering whether it can make the journey again, and Minho tells them to preserve its power until they understand the country around them. You stand beside the stream with Brenda. The sound of clean water fills the pauses between your words. Brenda looks across the trees towards the open land, and the quiet expression on her face carries exhaustion, caution, and a small refusal to surrender the future. Thomas and Brenda begin a relationship after the escape. It does not arrive as a grand promise, because neither of you has enough certainty for promises. It grows through shared watches, careful conversations, and the simple habit of sitting together when the others have gone to sleep. Warm sunlight enters the clearing through layers of leaves. It rests upon Brenda's hands, catches along the edge of her hair, and brightens the damp stones beside the stream. Long grass makes a low, rushing sound whenever the wind passes through it, while the branches above you shift with a dry, delicate murmur. You remain aware of the absent. Thomas continues to mourn Teresa and the other lost friends, carrying their names into the new landscape where no wall displays their photographs. Grief does not disappear because the sky is wide, and green leaves cannot erase the maze, the scorch, or the faces that vanished along the way. Teresa remains close in memory. You remember her voice, the confusion placed between you, and the moments when loyalty survived despite fear. New tenderness with Brenda does not replace Teresa, nor does it make the earlier losses easier to justify. The survivors accept that most of the world cannot immediately be restored. Cities remain damaged, governments remain compromised, and the flare continues among the infected population. The open refuge offers distance from the old society, but it does not offer a cure for every wound or a return to the lives that existed before the disease. Page's plan is for the immunes to begin a new human society. The phrase sounds almost too large for a group gathered around a small fire, with limited food and no reliable knowledge of the surrounding country. Yet its meaning becomes clearer as Minho distributes work. People share water, and each person begins to make decisions without a voice from the ceiling. The shore lies beyond a low rise. You walk there at dawn, following a path through wet grass, and discover a narrow beach curving around unfamiliar water. The surface remains pale beneath the early sky, while reeds bend at the edge and small shells shine among the stones. A hush settles across the unfamiliar shore. There is no alarm, no intercom, no coded instruction, and no distant machinery counting the seconds. The only movement comes from water folding against the sand and grass leaning inland beneath the morning wind. The final setting contrasts with the enclosed maze and the ruined scorch. You are no longer surrounded by walls that rearrange themselves each night, nor by streets where heat, hunger, and violence have stripped the world to its harshest outlines. Here, the land remains dangerous in quieter ways, through hunger, illness, weather, and the unknown presence of others. Minho marks the limits of the settlement. He chooses the stream as one boundary, the wooded ridge as another, and the shore as a place for observation rather than careless wandering. The practical shape of the community begins before anyone has named it. The flat trans remains near the trees. Its metal body reflects the sun in a dull line, a remnant of the institution that carried you away from the laboratories. For now, the vehicle is shelter, storage, transport, and evidence that the old system still reaches into the new landscape. The transition from laboratory to open landscape marks a change in political possibility. Inside Wicked, every decision belonged to an institution that claimed necessity as its authority. Outside, the survivors possess little, but what they have belongs to them, and no official hand has yet assigned each person a function. You begin to understand the difficulty of freedom. No institution rules the group through fear, but fear remains inside everyone who survived the trials. The survivors must decide how to live without another authority, taking the language of protection and turning it into permission. Minho calls a meeting beneath the tallest trees. People sit upon stones and folded blankets, with the stream passing behind them and the wind moving through the branches. No one speaks about a constitution or a government, because food, shelter, and medicine remain more immediate than any formal design. Still, the first arguments concern power. Some believe that one leader should make decisions quickly, while others remember how easily certainty became cruelty in wicked hands. Minho listens, answers practical questions, and refuses to pretend that his authority should continue without agreement. You hear the names of the dead within the discussion. Every plan includes what happened to those who cannot participate, and every proposal carries the memory of places where obedience was valued above compassion. The group understands that the future will be shaped by old injuries, even when no laboratory stands nearby. Page's epilogue arrives later, through a recorded message preserved among the supplies. The image of her face appears upon a small screen, pale and composed, while the surrounding leaves cast, moving shadows across the ground. Ava Page speaks as though addressing a record that may outlast her, and her voice carries the formal calm of someone who has spent years explaining impossible decisions. She states that the flare was deliberately created and released by the government as a form of population control. The revelation settles among you with a coldness that sunlight cannot remove. The disease was not an accident of nature, and the suffering of the infected was not merely the consequence of a failed containment effort. Page describes a government frightened by population growth, environmental collapse, and the loss of political control. The flare became an instrument before it became a catastrophe, and the authorities released it believing that a reduced population might preserve the species. Wicked was then formed to search for a solution, but the search inherited the logic of the crime. The message reframes Wicked as a failed institution rather than a successful savior. Its laboratories produced data, its trials produced trauma, and its leaders placed humanity's survival above the lives of individuals. The work was presented as necessary, yet necessity became a shelter for decisions that could not withstand ordinary moral judgment. Page concludes that the immunes are humanity's best chance to continue. Her words do not make you feel chosen. They make the burden heavier, because the future has been placed into the hands of people who have barely escaped childhood and have already carried too many impossible decisions. The screen goes dark beneath the trees. For several moments, the clearing contains only the sound of water and the faint movement of leaves. The survivors do not cheer, and no one announces that the suffering has acquired a worthy purpose. You think of the trials. You are free from wicked direct control, but you remain shaped by its trials, by memories removed and returned, by rules imposed upon fear, and by the knowledge that a room can become a weapon when someone else controls its doors. The new society must decide how to live without another institution ruling through fear. This decision cannot be completed in one meeting because fear has learned to hide inside useful systems. A watch may become surveillance, a leader may become a ruler, and protection may become another word for confinement. Minho begins with small limits. He assigns duties for fixed periods, asks the group to share information, and keeps supplies visible rather than hidden behind a locked door. The methods are simple, yet their simplicity becomes a quiet resistance to everything Wicked considered efficient. Brenda helps organize medicine and shelter. She makes lists upon scraps of packaging, checks wounds beneath the shade, and asks each person what remains possible. Her work has no grand design, but it gives shape to the hours, and the survivors begin to understand that society is made from repeated acts of attention. You and Brenda walk along the shoreline in the evening. The water holds the last light in broken silver, and the breeze brings the clean smell of damp earth from the inland trees. Behind you, the settlement grows quiet as fires settle into coals and voices soften near the shelters. There is no certainty between you. You know that grief may alter its form, that danger may return, and that the flare may continue to claim lives beyond the protected land. Even so, Brenda's presence offers a kind of companionship that does not demand the abandonment of memory. Thomas's final choice is to protect life without accepting Wicked's script. You do not reject the future, and you do not allow Page's instructions to become another unquestioned command. The choice is quieter than rebellion, because it appears in the refusal to repeat a method that treated children as instruments. The survivors begin again, where no laboratory has yet assigned them a role. There is no completed civilization waiting beneath the trees, only a protected environment with water, food, open ground, and the possibility of learning. The safe place is a beginning, not a completed civilization. Every structure remains temporary. The shelters can be repaired, replaced, or moved, and the paths through the grass have not yet become roads. The absence of fixed institutions makes the settlement vulnerable, but it also leaves room for decisions that Wicked never permitted. The infected population remains beyond the refuge. The surviving group waits for the flare to run its course among those who cannot share the protection of immunity. News arrives irregularly, carried by travelers, damaged radios, and brief messages whose details are difficult to verify. Some reports speak of abandoned towns. Other accounts describe communities refusing government orders, while still more tell of families sheltering behind doors with no medicine and little food. The world has not ended in one moment, and its continued suffering prevents the refuge from becoming a simple paradise. Clean water continues to move through the settlement. You kneel beside it in the morning and see your reflection disturbed by small currents. The face in the stream appears older than the face that entered the maze, although the sunlight makes the difference difficult to measure. Birdsong follows the dawn. After mechanical noise, the natural sounds seem almost too spacious, as though the land has forgotten how to be quiet around human beings. A blackbird calls from a thicket, and the answer comes from a distant slope beyond the settlement. The closing vision is about rebuilding rather than conquering. No survivor speaks of reclaiming every city or restoring the authority of the old government. The aim is smaller and more demanding, concerned with making shelter, sharing knowledge, protecting children, and refusing to measure human worth through usefulness. The work begins beneath warm sunlight filtering through leaves. Long grass moves around the first garden beds, and Minho marks a path between them with flat stones. Brenda sorts seeds beside a low shelter, while another survivor carries water from the stream. You help where the day requires. Sometimes you gather wood, sometimes you repair a wall, and sometimes you sit in silence with someone who has remembered another name. These ordinary actions become a form of mourning because each one preserves a future for people who will never see it. Teresa remains part of that future through memory. The other lost friends remain present in stories repeated beside the fire, though no sentence can restore them. Their absence is carried forward without being converted into a lesson that excuses the people who caused it. The moral uncertainty remains severe. Page's plan may save lives, yet it rests upon suffering that cannot be made acceptable through its outcome. The immunes may become a new society, but no one can promise that power will remain gentle once hunger, fear, and ambition enter its rooms. You understand that freedom does not end danger. It changes the question from who controls the survivors to how the survivors will control themselves. The answer will be made through habits, boundaries, arguments, forgiveness, and the willingness to stop a useful plan when its human cost becomes unbearable. Evening settles across the protected land. The leaves darken above you, the long grass turns bronze, and the stream gathers the color of the sky. Along the unfamiliar shore, the water moves with a patient hush, carrying no message from the laboratories. The flat trans stands beyond the campfire. Its machinery has cooled, and its windows reflect the first stars. The vehicle remains a reminder of the institution, but it no longer determines the direction of your life. You look towards the trees. The old society cannot immediately be restored, and perhaps restoration is not the correct aim. A different society may grow here, imperfect and uncertain, shaped by the refusal to let fear become law. Ava Page's voice has finished, but her consequences remain. She leaves behind a plan, a warning, and the knowledge that the flare was created deliberately by a government seeking control. She also leaves behind the belief that the immunes are humanity's best chance to continue. You carry that belief carefully. Does not absolve Page, Wicked, or the government, and it does not transform the trials into a necessary kindness. It simply places a responsibility in the hands of people who can choose what to do with it. Night reaches the open landscape. The fires burn low, and the survivors sleep beneath shelters that have no locks on the inside. Beyond the trees, the shore remains unseen, though its quiet presence continues through the dark. The maze is behind you. The ruined scorch is behind you. The laboratories are behind you, though their patterns of thought still move through memory, waiting to be resisted whenever fear begins to sound reasonable. You lie beside Brenda beneath the shifting shadows of leaves. The future has no completed map, no institution prepared to explain it, and no promise that the next morning will be kind. There is only the protected land, the clean water, the open sky, and the fragile agreement to keep one another alive. Morning will bring work. Minho will count supplies, the group will repair shelters, and someone will walk to the shore to watch for travelers. Seeds will be placed in soil, names will be spoken, and decisions will be made without wicked permission. You remain with the living. You mourn the dead without surrendering the future to them, and you protect the future without pretending that their deaths were justified. The distinction is painful, but it is also the beginning of a moral life beyond the script. Around you, warm sunlight will return through leaves. Long grass will move in the wind, clean water will pass beneath the trees, and birdsong will rise where mechanical noise once filled every silence. Along the unfamiliar shore, the hush will remain, wide enough to contain uncertainty. The new human society begins there, not as a victory, but as a promise made without certainty. It begins with people who have been used and who now must learn consent. It begins with survivors who have been ruled by fear and who now must learn restraint. In that open place, beneath the leaves and beside the water, you move forward without accepting wicked script. You carry the names of those who were lost, protect the life that remains, and rebuild what may yet endure.